Hello everyone, welcome to What If Quirkless Deku Got Trained by Batman's and Became His Successor Part 6. Before we start, please go support zdforrest for writing that awesome fanfic. Chapter 64, Sun Eater of the Big Three. Tamaki Amajiki followed the siege of police and heroes. It was utter pandemonium. The resistance from the Hasaikai was unexpected, and the battle was sudden. Amajiki wasn't a brave man, he knew this about himself. He was shy and socially awkward. He doubted himself, and would much rather spend his time at home in his room than be around other people. And yet, he was one of the big three, the top students in UA High School, arguably the greatest school for heroes in the world. He often asked himself, how did something like this happen? Each time he did, the answer would usually walk in front of him, smiling and laughing as he went along. Ever since he was a kid, he always had difficulty making friends. He had transferred to a new school at the beginning of the school year, and as a shy, soft-spoken kid, he immediately didn't fit into the various cliques around him. He figured he better get used to this, as who would possibly want to be friends with someone as pathetic as he was? But then something happened that would change his life forever. Ever since that day, Mirio Togata had always been there. It didn't matter that he was shy. It didn't matter that he was timid. Mirio had enough energy for the both of them. Amajiki was always so amazed at how someone who had such little control over his quirk could be so hopeful and positive about himself and the future. He never let things get him down. He never let his enthusiasm die. When Amajiki looked at him, it was like looking at the sun itself. Looking at his friend now, storming the gates of the shy Hasaikai, he was reminded as to why he had been able to come so far. It was because he was chasing the sun. He was surprised that the Hasaikai managed to attack first. They had been meticulous in their approach to the case, making sure not to alert any of the Hasaikai members to their intentions. As the lower-level enforcers piled out of the compound, attacking the police and heroes, he couldn't help but wonder if their plan was leaked to them. But he noticed they were not attacking as a cohesive unit as they were. Rather, they were like rabid dogs lashing out in all directions. "Leave everyone up here to us!" shouted one of the heroes to Sir Night Eye and the Green Arrow. "You make your way into the compound!" With some difficulty, Night Eye, the Arrow, Eraserhead, Fatgum, their sidekicks, several police officers, and various other heroes managed to push through the perimeter and storm the compound. "The top brass haven't shown their faces yet," said Eraserhead. "These punks at the gate are just trying to buy time for them, either to fight back or to flee. We need to be prepared." "Here," said Night Eye, stopping suddenly. He turned to a notch in the wall containing a vase and plant. He moved the plant and began pressing the floorboards beneath it. "It's a hidden door," he said, pressing the floorboards in a certain sequence. When finished, the notch in the hallway swung open, revealing a hidden passageway. "How'd you do that?" said Fatgum. "When I used my quirk on that henchman at the department store, I was able to see the combination," said Night Eye. "Let's go!" Before they could enter, 3 armed guards piled out of the doorway, advancing on them. Arsenal, Centipeder, and Bubble Girl instinctively stepped forward, taking all 3 down without issue. "We'll handle these guys!" shouted Bubble Girl. "You go ahead!" Night Eye, Arrow, and the others immediately made their way through the door and down a flight of stairs. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, they stopped in their tracks as the hallway came to an abrupt ending. "A dead end?" said Rocklock. "So much for your foresight, Night Eye! Now what do we do?" "Hold on," said Togata, stepping forward. "Let me take a look." He walked towards the wall, using his permeation quirk to look through to the other side. Because his costume was designed with special fibers made from his hair, it was able to become permeable with him, so he wouldn't pass through it. As he suspected, the hall continued beyond the door. They had placed this wall here as a way to throw them off. "The hallway continues on the other side," said Togata. "I got this," said Izuku, stepping forward. He reached into his utility belt and retrieved a wad of plastic explosives, placing it on the wall. After everyone had ducked in cover, he detonated it, causing the wall to crumble in on itself. "Not bad, kid," said Green Arrow. "Come on, let's keep moving," said Togata. As they continued down the hallway, the ground around them began to shake. At first, Amajiki thought it was an earthquake, but then the walls and ceiling began to twist and contort. The walls and floor bubbled and rocked, causing the heroes and police officers to struggle to keep their balance. "This has to be Uraraka!" shouted the police detective. Amajiki remembered the briefing. Uraraka was one of Chisaki's top enforcers. His quirk, mimicry, gave him the ability to enter objects and control them as he would his own body. If he was in the walls, that explained why everything was moving around them. At this rate, he could contort the building into any configuration he wanted to, creating multiple escape routes for Chisaki to escape with the girl. They could be lost forever down here. As Amajiki felt the panic begin to slip into his heart, he also felt a strong hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Mirio, smiling at him. "Don't worry, Sun Eater," he said. "You can do this. We're going to make it." He gripped his friend's shoulder tighter before he took off down the twisted hallway. He passed through the wall at the end of the hallway, disappearing from their sight. As he did that, Amajiki felt his stomach lurch as the floor gave out from beneath the party, all of them falling down to the floor below. "These guys are really screwing with us," said Rock Lock as everyone staggered to their feet. Well, said a voice behind them. "Looks like some state-sponsored thugs have decided to crash our party. Isn't that strange?" The group turned to the source of the voice, revealing 3 Hasaikai henchmen. One of them was holding a long katana, wearing a green shirt and tie. Another was a large, bald man with an impressive physique, but no other distinguishing features. Lastly, behind the two, was a tall, slender man wearing what looked to be a crude white mask, almost like a pillowcase, with a rope tied around his neck, giving him the appearance of a Terra Boza hanging doll. "You're nothing but a bunch of petty criminals," said Fatgum, cracking his knuckles. "Let's see which one of you has a glass jaw." Amajiki lifted his arm, preventing Fatgum from advancing. "No," he said. "The pros need to conserve their strength. These guys just want to slow us down. I'll take care of them myself." "Are you nuts, kid?" shouted one of the sidekicks. She was one of the Green Arrows, codenamed Speedy. Even though she was roughly his age, he noticed she carried an impressive aura around her, suggested experience beyond her years. He found it very intimidating, and therefore tried to avoid her. "She's right," said Kirishima. "We can take them all together." "Yes," said the man with the katana. "Please, all of you stay. I can kill all of you." "Hold your fire," shouted the detective. "Don't let him see your guns. Leave it to the pros." "Looks like you've done your homework," said the man. "No matter, that just means you'll be easier to kill." He advanced on the group and stretched forth his unencumbered hand. As he did, Eraserhead stepped forward, using his quirk. Whatever the man with the katana tried to do, it didn't happen, and he stared at his hand in confusion. "Eraserhead," said the bald man, stepping forward and drawing a handgun. "I heard that someone like you existed. But it makes no difference. We're just here to slow you down, and quirks or not, we still have weapons." Before he could react, the 3 guards were immediately encircled with what looked to be large octopus tentacles, all of them produced from Amajiki's fingers. He lifted the trio into the air and threw them down to the ground in a heap. He managed to gather all their weapons with his other hand, transforming it into a lobster claw and cracking them all to pieces. "They're trying to hold us all here," he said. "Let's just give them one to fight. Get out of here and find the girl, hurry!" "Let's go," said Fatgum reluctantly. "Wait, don't go," said the man who had the katana. He still couldn't use his quirk, as Eraserhead was still blocking it, so Amajiki seized his chance to slam them into the wall behind them. The rest of the group began to follow Fatgum, but Izuku and Speedy were reluctant to leave him. "Go, you two!" Amajiki shouted. "Find the girl, and help Mirio!" As the rest of the heroes left the room, Amajiki knew that he had a limited amount of time before these 3 rallied. Lifting his free hand, he stretched forth the tentacles from his fingers towards his opponents with enough force to render them unconscious. However, he recoiled in pain when one of the tentacles hit the mask of the man with the katana. It began to bleed profusely until Amajiki retracted it, his regular fingers returning. He noticed the man's mask had broken open, revealing a concealed blade. "Can't hesitate when it comes to us," said the man. "You can't kill, we know about the hero code. But we have no restrictions. We have all given everything to this cause, even the will to live. You have no idea what people are capable of when they have nothing to lose." Amajiki looked to the bald man next to him, as he began to feel his grip loosening. Multicolored crystals were sprouting over his body, cutting the tentacles and allowing him to break free. Amajiki created a clamshell out of his hand, but was surprised when the shell was ripped from him and landed easily in the hand of the man with the katana. Amajiki remembered the file he read on the Hasaikai. He was Toya Setsuno. His larceny quirk allowed him to steal whatever weapons his opponents had available, which is why the police refused to open fire on him. The bald man, Yu Hojo, had a crystallization quirk which allowed him to form diamond-hard crystals all over his body. The last man, Soramitsu Tabe, was a bit of a mystery to Amajiki, his quirk only being listed as food. Hojo formed crystals over his fist and lunged at Amajiki, who only managed to cover his hands in thick octopus muscle, coated with heavy shell plating, before it struck him, taking the brunt of the attack. His mind was racing. He had lost his window of opportunity to take them down easily, and now he was outnumbered. He desperately tried to keep the fear from creeping into his heart as he began to question his decision. Amajiki looked up in surprise as he saw something sling from behind him, embedding in his opponent's crystallized arm. They both ceased their grapple and looked at the object, realizing it was an arrow. A light on the shaft began to beep, and Amajiki took that as his cue to lunge away to safety. Before Hojo could remove the arrow, it exploded, sending him careening back towards his compatriots, slamming into the wall with immense force. Amajiki looked behind him, surprised, and saw Speedy standing at the entrance of the room, another arrow drawn taut in her bow. "What are you doing here?" said Amajiki. "I couldn't let you have all the fun," said Speedy, launching another arrow towards Hojo. Immediately Setsuno tried to use his quirk to take the arrow in midair, but Amajiki ensnared him with his tentacles before he had the chance, slamming him again into the wall. The arrow hit its mark. This time, a sticky, glue-like substance erupted from the arrowhead, quickly encapsulating Hojo. He tried to break free of the glue, but was unable to, as the stretchy, sticky substance was resistant to his crystals. "No, no, 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 no!" shouted Setsuno. "This isn't looking good. We need to end this. Wake up, Tabe!" he shouted to his hooded cohort, who appeared to be unconscious. "It's time to eat!" Tabe's eyes snapped open immediately. He jumped up with alarming speed and lunged at Amajiki, taking a swift bite out of one of his tentacles. Amajiki winced as Tabe continued to devour the tentacles as quickly as he could produce them. "Delicious!" shouted Tabe. "Delicious!" "Get away from him!" shouted Speedy, launching another arrow at Tabe. This time, Setsuno was ready, and used his quirk to take her bow and arrow straight from her hands. Surprised, she quickly jumped out of the way as Setsuno launched one of her own arrows at her. Tabe continued to devour Amajiki's tentacles at alarming speed. Even the armored plating around the tentacles didn't seem to deter him. "Dance, little archer!" shouted Setsuno giddily, launching more arrows at Speedy as she continued to dodge them. "Looks like the pros should have stayed here. You think just because you're heroes and we're trash you could have disposed of us easily? We'll give our lives for Chisaki, the man who gave us purpose, who gave us everything. Tobe!" he shouted to his companion. "Devour these two and let's catch up with the others." Amajiki looked horrified, glancing at Speedy. The villains were able to turn the tide quickly in their favor, and now she was in danger as well. They had impeccable teamwork, even with one of them incapacitated. The feeling of fear began to creep back into his heart. He couldn't let this woman be eaten because of his carelessness. He remembered Mirio, and the things he said to him back in junior high school. "The only reason I am able to get as far as I am is because I have someone like you to inspire me." It was the first time anyone had ever said something like that to him before, the first time he ever felt like he was an inspiration to someone. He began to find courage in himself. His mind continued to reflect back to that day, the day he got his hero name. Sun Eater. Mirio told him that he had a light about him that was bright enough to swallow the sun. He was going to make Mirio proud. Immediately, his tentacles began to grow larger, the armor became thicker. Tabe continued his attack, but his bites and movements became slower. Suddenly, he stopped attacking and began to sway. "What's wrong?" shouted Sasuno. "Why aren't you attacking?" "Sick," said Tabe weakly. "Feel sick." He fell to the ground in a heap and remained still. "Tabe!" shouted Sasuno. "What did you do to him?" "As he ate my tentacles, he got a little something extra with them," Amajiki said. "Octopus have the ability to produce venomous bites to their prey. I was able to produce that same venomous protein within my tentacles. He won't be getting up any time soon." "No!" shouted Sasuno. He lifted his hand and pointed it towards Hojo. With some difficulty, he was able to use his quirk to steal the glue that encased him, freeing his comrade. Hojo seized his chance and charged Amajiki, delivering a devastating haymaker to his face. He stared in shock, however, as he saw the attack was useless, as Amajiki had grown the same type of crystals over his face, protecting him from the attack. How did you?" he said before being knocked away by a large armored tentacle. "I swallowed one of your broken crystals when you weren't looking," said Amajiki. The tentacles then began to grow larger, and the Cretaceous armor plating was covering his entire body, this time producing crystals along with them. Amajiki had worked hard for years to perfect his quirk, to master the ability to produce several manifestations at once into one devastating attack. Chimera Kraken. Setsuno tried to use his quirk to steal back the crystals, but screeched in pain as something slashed him across his eyes. Speedy had produced a small crossbow bolt, and seized her opportunity to slash Setsuno across the eyes while he was distracted. His quirk requires him to see the objects he is stealing. Without his sight, he is powerless. As he stumbled, grasping about, Speedy kicked his legs out from under him and rammed his head onto the concrete, knocking him unconscious. With his allies defeated, Hojo made a last-ditch effort to take down Amajiki, but it was a futile maneuver. Using his ultra-hardened tentacles, he was able to easily lift the attacker off his feet, ramming him into the wall repeatedly until the man lay still and unconscious. With their enemies fallen, Speedy retrieved her bow and Amajiki's body returned to normal. "Are you okay?" asked Speedy, walking over to Amajiki. "I'm fine," he replied. "Are you okay?" "Fine," she replied. They stood in awkward silence for a moment before Amajiki spoke. "Why did you come back to help me?" he asked. "I thought you were going with the other pros." She didn't answer, but instead avoided his gaze, a slight blush on her face. She did an about-face and began running in the direction the heroes took. "Let's go, kid," she said. "They'll need our help." Amajiki simply looked confused as he watched her run out of the room. Shrugging slightly, and taking one last glance at the fallen Hasaikai enforcers, he followed after her down the hallway. These guys were tough, and he had a feeling that they were only the beginning of what was waiting for them in this hellhole. If this was the case, then Speedy was right. The pros definitely needed their help. Chapter 65, Red Riot's Gambit. The rest of the raid party was making the most out of the time afforded to them by Sun Eater's decision to fight the Hasaikai enforcers alone. Fatgum was concerned. He didn't want to leave his protege behind, but he knew that time was of the essence. However, one of the young sidekicks of the Green Arrow, Speedy, seemed to be unable to stomach this and had doubled back to help him. Izuku wanted to follow, but Oliver had told him that Speedy had faced more villains in a month than many did in their entire careers, and that he had utmost confidence in her abilities. Besides, Izuku's number one priority was finding Eri, and taking her out of the hands of that madman Chisaki. As they continued down the hall, Eraserhead began to grow wary. He felt as if they were being watched, and kept vigilant for any surprise attacks. No sooner had he thought this when a large piece of the wall next to him seemed to spring to life and lunge out at him. He realized that it was the Hasaikai villain they encountered when they first entered the compound, the one who was able to control the cement walls around them. His range was greater than they expected, and was obviously trying to take Eraser out of the fight. His Eraser quirk was too much of a liability for them. Before the moving wall could envelop him, he felt something push him hard out of the way, glancing back to see Fatgum had taken the attack for him. The rotund hero was forced through the opposing wall and out of sight. "Fatgum!" shouted Izuku. "Kirishima, let's—" He turned to face his friends so they could help their fallen comrade, but he was gone. Before Izuku could ascertain where he was, the walls and floors began to morph and change all around them. He felt something grab him by the scruff of his costume, pulling him hard as a new wall was formed where he was previously standing. He looked up to see Eraserhead standing over him, pulling him to safety. "Not this time, Midoriya," he said. "You're staying where I can see you." Fatgum rolled at alarming speed down a dark, slanted corridor, coming to an abrupt stop as he tumbled onto the level floor beneath him. He was unharmed, his fat having absorbed the shock of the attack, but to say he wasn't stunned a little would be lying. He was glad he was able to push Eraserhead out of the way of the attack. He was the cornerstone to their plan. If his quirk was compromised, it would make the rescue 10 times more complicated for them, maybe even preventing them from succeeding. But now he had to figure out where he was and how to find his way back. He was shaken from his thoughts when he suddenly heard a muffled cry coming from under him. Standing up, he was shocked to see that Kirishima had somehow accompanied him in his descent. "What the?" he said. "What are you doing here, kid?" "I tried to jump out in front of Aizawa," said Kirishima. "But I kinda got stuck in your fat." "Oh," said Fatgum. "Well, nothing we can do about it now." His head snapped suddenly to the left as he heard the sound of approaching footsteps. "Get ready, we're not alone." A large figure came running at them from the shadows. Kirishima barely had time to put up his defense before a large, metal gauntlet fist collided with his body. He was thrown back at tremendous speed, crashing into the wall behind him. Fatgum was immediately accosted next, his assailant hitting him with several devastating blows. Normally, his fat would absorb the attacks, but to his surprise, he was able to feel every one of them. This guy was strong. Very strong. Rallying himself, he looked back at his fallen in turn. "You okay, kid?" he shouted. The dust around Kirishima cleared. He was trembling in a large pile of debris, his hardened forearms cracked and flaking. The assailant managed to break through his hardening quirk in one blow. "I'm glad to see that you're not using weapons," said the attacker. Getting a good look at him, he was large and imposing, wearing a simple white brawler's shirt and pointed beak mask that covered his entire face. "Anyone can win when using a weapon. It's a coward's way. Only real fighters use their fists. Are you a real fighter? Stay still and find out," shouted Fatgum, throwing a punch at the interloper. His fist never reached its target, as a yellow wall of energy formed around the attacker. A second individual appeared from the shadows behind the larger man. He was wearing a gray kimono and beak mask, but his eyes were exposed. He was rubbing his head, as if he had a headache, as he approached them. "Fatgum and a kid with a hardening quirk," said the smaller man. "Both are better suited for defense. Disappointing, isn't it, Rappa?" Rappa continued his attack on Fatgum, launching powerful blows at lightning speed. Fatgum's hero suit had already taken significant damage, exposing his midsection. These two weren't on the quirks list that they had researched on the Hasaikai, but they didn't look like outside help. "We are spear and shield," said the man in the kimono, "whereas you two are only shields. Although I don't think that one over there even qualifies as even a shield," he added to Kirishima, who was struggling to get to his feet. Kirishima was shocked. After fighting the Titan creature a few weeks ago, he thought he had gotten stronger, but compared to this monster he was still weak. He wasn't able to withstand a single blow from him. Another attack like that and he would be done for. "Don't let him break your spirit, kid!" shouted Fatgum, as if reading his mind. "The minute you lose your will to fight, they win. Let's take these two down and get out of here." "I like the way the fat one thinks," said Rappa. "Take this damn thing down, Tangai. I don't need your stupid bubble to protect me." "Remember what Master Overhaul said," Tangai warned his comrade. Our skills complement each other. He wanted us to work together to ensure our victory. I don't care what Overhaul says, said Rappa, growling in frustration. I just want a good death match. Very well, said Tengai, dropping the shield over Rappa but keeping it over himself. If you think you can take them, be my guest. Now we're talking, shouted Rappa. Without missing a beat, he charged Fatgum and resumed his onslaught. Fatgum was at a loss. He couldn't risk Rappa attacking the kid again, so he had to take most of the punishment from Rappa's attacks. The problem was, he was too quick to dodge the attacks in close range, and if he continued his attacks, he would soon be worn down to nothing. He had to play this smart. He glanced at Tengai. His eyes were shut tight, but it was obvious that he didn't need them open to see what was going on. Fatgum knew his chances were slim, but even slimmer if he didn't do something about Tengai. However, it was clear these two were an odd couple. They didn't want to work together. He could use that. So Rappa, is it? Said Fatgum. It's been a while since I've been hit this hard. But I've been at this a long time, and I think we both know what this boils down to: either my body fails, or you get too tired to continue. Which is stronger, the spear or the shield? Kirishima watched in horror as his mentor continued to take the punishing barrage of punches. He knew that Fatgum was protecting him, and Kirishima cursed silently to himself. He was so sure he had gotten stronger, but he was just as useless as he ever was. His mind trailed back to his time in middle school. He always tried to be the hero to stand up against those who couldn't help themselves, but he usually ended up getting the crap kicked out of him. His hardening quirk barely protected him, and it rarely ever won him any fights. As much as he tried to emulate his hero, the Crimson Riot, he just wasn't strong enough to help anyone. Then there was his classmate, Mina Ashido. A positivity bubbled around her wherever she went. She had an innate ability to assess the situation and resolve it, without ever throwing a punch. He knew that she was applying for Yue, and she had all the charisma and strength of any hero, even without using her quirk. Her pink skin, vibrant personality, and skillful ability made her perfect hero material. She was everything he wanted to be, and everything he was not. His quirk wasn't very strong, either was it very flashy. He couldn't hold it for very long, and couldn't take much punishment when he did. He knew he had no chance to stand against other applicants to UA High. But that didn't deter him. Ashido and Crimson Riot inspired him to become more than he was. He would play the words of his hero in his head every day as he trained his body and quirk past its breaking point. If you have a chivalrous heart, it doesn't matter what your quirk is. So he continued to train. Continued to push himself to go beyond his limits. And he saw he gradually became stronger. His quirk was easier to maintain, and he could take more punishment than before. He truly felt as if he was finally becoming the worthy potential hero he sought to be. Or so he thought. He remembered that day vividly. He was walking home from school when he saw two girls cornered by what he could only describe as a gigantic man in a hooded cloak. He was asking for directions to a local hero agency, but the two middle school girls were too frightened to speak. The more times he asked, the more frustrated the man got. His hand, which was resting on the building behind them, began to crush and break the wall, showering the girls with debris. Kirishima looked around. There were no heroes or police around to help. Someone had to step in. This was his chance to prove his mettle, to prove that his warrior spirit was enough to carry him past his weaknesses. But try as he might, he couldn't get his feet to move. "Come on!" he shouted internally. "Go help them! Be a man!" But his feet continued to stay planted where they were. His heart was beating rapidly, his hands were trembling, and he was sweating profusely. He had to do something, but he was too scared, he was too weak. Suddenly, a pink flash came dashing between the giant man and the two frightened girls. It was Ashido. With a fire in her eyes, she quickly gave him directions to the hero agency he was looking for. The man simply thanked her and continued on his way. After he disappeared from sight, Ashido's strength failed her, and she sank to her knees, admitting how frightened she was. Kirishima continued his walk home, his heart heavy with shame. Ashio was just as scared as he was, but she still found the will to act when her friends needed her the most. All he could do was stand frozen in place like a coward. The ability to act without thought for one's safety, to rush to others' aid without caving to the fear, was the essence of being a hero. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't even a man. He took his picture of the Crimson Riot and threw it against his bookshelf. In doing so, he had inadvertently knocked off a holodisc of an interview with the same hero, causing it to spring to life, startling him slightly. "You have a reputation, even among other heroes, as being a bit reckless," said the reporter in the holo video. "You often run headlong into dangerous situations without thought for your own safety. Do you ever get scared doing that?" "What kind of question is that?" said Crimson Riot incredulously. "Of course I get afraid." Kirishima paused, turning to the holo video in surprise. Did he hear that right? Did the Crimson Riot just admit to being afraid? "Show me a person who isn't afraid to look death in the face," the Crimson Riot continued, "and I'll show you an idiot. The reason behind my reckless behavior, for running headlong into dangerous situations, is because when I was a sidekick, I failed to save someone in peril." "I heard about that," said the reporter. "But it wasn't your fault." "You don't understand," the hero said with a dismissive wave. "The day I hesitated, someone lost their life because my spirit was weak. I could have done something to save them, and I froze. I will always carry that on my shoulders. Of course I'm afraid to face any villain, knowing very well it could be my last moment on Earth. But I'm more afraid to look someone in the eyes as they die. That's far, far worse to me than any villain. Being a hero doesn't mean being fearless. It means pushing through the fear and doing what needs to be done." Kirishima felt his heart swell at the words of his hero, tears dripping from his eyes. All this time, he thought that the Crimson Riot wasn't afraid of anything, that he was able to face any situation without fear, but the truth was that he was just as afraid as Kirishima was. And even he had a moment where he failed to come to someone's aid because of that fear. But he didn't let that stop him. He used that as a lesson to drive him, to push him forward, into the hero that he had become. He vowed to himself that day he would never let himself freeze again, no matter the fear he felt. He would never let it stop him from doing what needs to be done. Since then he had faced dozens of scary situations, the League of Villains, the incident at Kamino Ward, the Titan monster, and he never froze in those situations. And he wasn't about to freeze again now. In a flash of speed, he rushed between his mentor and his attacker, taking every last punch the man could throw at him, surprising them both. Despite the pain he felt, he continued to hold his position, taking every blow. Finally, he saw his opening, and launched a counterattack. Putting every amount of force he had left into a haymaker, he lunged at his target, but it never connected, stopping suddenly as another barrier came between them. Tengai had put his shield back up. With Kirishima's last amount of energy spent, he fell. "What did you do that for?" shouted Rappa angrily to his comrade. "Don't be a fool," said Tengai. "The boy's attack was pointless because of my shield. Now quickly finish them off before dash." "It wasn't pointless," said Fatgum in a low voice. He was hunched over and trembling, but was able to grasp Kirishima before he hit the floor. "The kinetic energy from every punch you've thrown has been building in my body all this time. You've just given me the instrument to your own defeat." "Tengai, drop the shield!" shouted Rappa. "He's bluffing," said Tengai. "He can't penetrate my shields." "Don't be so sure," shouted Fatgum. His rotund body had shrunk to that of a lean, muscular man, and his right fist began to glow a golden hue. "You made two fatal mistakes. Along with underestimating me, you also underestimated the true might of the unbreakable Red Riot." Fatgum lunged towards the enemy, his golden fist connecting with the shield. Tengai gasped in shock and reeled backwards, as if in pain, as his enemy's fist pierced the shield wall, shattering it completely. The force of the kinetic blast from the destruction of his shield sent the spear and shield careening backwards, crashing against the wall. Fatgum paused as both of his adversaries lay motionless before him. "Kid! Red Riot, can you hear me?" As Kirishima slowly began to regain consciousness, he realized someone was calling his name. His eyes began to open slowly, and someone he didn't recognize was standing over him. He was a muscular, blond man with a domino mask. His clothes were torn and shredded, and he was covered in marks and bruises. "Who are you?" Kirishima asked weakly. "It's me, Fatgum," said his mentor incredulously. "I had to shed some weight to end that fight." "I'm sorry," said Kirishima, his eyes closing as he began to drift into unconsciousness again. "I tried to protect you. I'm sorry." "You've done more than enough, kid," said Fatgum. "I'm proud of you. It's not over." Fatgum turned sharply as he heard the voice behind him. Rappa was back on his feet. "This is a fight to the death," he said. "And I'm not dead yet." Damn it, Fatgum thought. How is he still standing? Did the blast somehow cushion the blow? He expended all his energy with that final attack, and Kirishima was down for the count. He was completely depleted of his fat reserves, so his defense was limited. He readied himself for another attack, but Rappa stopped short. "There's a room down the hall where we can get patched up," he said. "Bring that kidnapped man with you." Fatgum was speechless. "Nice try," he said. "Do you think I'm gonna fall for that? Do I look like a guy who tricks people?" Rappa shot back. "Rappa, no!" shouted Tengai, struggling to get to his feet. "Think about what you're doing. They put you down here because you're a bloodthirsty beast who thrives on violence. That's why they put you in my charge. Now do as I say and—" Rappa kicked Tengai hard in the head, knocking him out completely. Fatgum was taken aback at this sudden attack against his comrade. "Shut up," he said simply before turning back to Fatgum. "Honestly, with my arms broken like this I can't even put up a proper fight anyway. Let's go, I'll show you the way." He began walking down the hall, with Fatgum warily following behind him. "What do you want from us, Rappa?" asked Fatgum. "I want to fight to the death," Rappa replied without turning. "I come from the world of MMA, and used to fight in the underground." Fatgum had heard of the underground, an illegal fighting ring somewhere in Kamino where people could use their quirks against each other uninhibitedly. Most of the fights were regulated and would stop when one of them stopped moving, but he heard that there was a higher level class of fighting where the combatants didn't stop until one of them stopped breathing. "Most of my opponents were taken down with a single punch," Rappa continued. "You don't know the thrill that comes with a true challenge, when your life's on the line. I like your style, you and the redhead. I want you guys to heal up so we can fight again. I'll kill you for sure next time." "Don't you get it?" said Fatgum. "There isn't going to be a next time. You and your buddies are just gonna get arrested after this." "Who cares?" said Rappa. "We're both still alive, so the fight's a draw." Fatgum was still pondering this enemy when they finally reached the medical room. Rappa was very straightforward and single-minded. He didn't sense any ulterior motive from this man. He only wanted to fight. He didn't have much of a luxury to question it right now. Kirishima needed immediate medical attention. He sat the boy on the table and began patching him up. He was really proud of his protege. Tamaki must have seen what he was capable of when he brought him in to see him, and the boy didn't disappoint. "Why did you end up here?" Fatgum asked Rappa. "Because I lost," said Rappa. "What do you mean?" "Overhaul is the only person I've ever lost to," Rappa explained. "That man is not normal. He came out of nowhere and asked me to join his crew. He was real pushy about it as well. I told him I'd fight him for it. Once the match began." He paused. "One minute I was dead, the next, I was back to normal. I've never felt anything like it." Fatgum was shocked. It took both him and Kirishima everything that they had just to stand toe-to-toe with this guy, and Chisaki was able to kill him and bring him back without much effort. "I've challenged him 5 times since I got here," Rappa continued. "I've lost each time. I'm here until I can beat him. I'll only be free once I kill him." Fatgum was silent as he processed this information, looking at the bandaged and unconscious Kirishima. If Overhaul was truly as powerful as Rappa made him out to be, then their assault just got a lot more complicated. He only hoped that the others were up to the task. Chisaki was walking down one of the halls in the base of the compound, his right-hand man Kurono carrying Eri behind him. He could hear the battle raging above them as explosions caused the hallways to shake with small tremors. "So noisy," Chisaki said. "I hope those fools are doing their jobs." "I hate to say it, but this may be the end of the Hasaikai," said Kurono. "As long as the boss and I live, the Hasaikai will too," said Chisaki, staring at the red container in his hand. "Now that we have a finished product, we can finally get the financing that we need. A weapon even the heroes will be afraid of. Investors will be coming in droves." He turned to face the two people trailing behind them. "It's time you temps started making yourselves useful. Start pulling your weight." "Okay," said Himiko Toga cheerfully. "You can count on us, Overhaul," replied Twice. Chapter 66, Lemillion. Back near the surface, Izuku and the others were struggling to find a way out of Uraraka's trap as the walls continued to close in around them. In a flash, Rock moved forward and placed his hands on one of the walls. A red flash shimmered through the wall as it went rigid, holding in place. He did the same thing to the wall on the other side of him. "This way, hurry!" he shouted. "I can't hold this forever." The heroes and police began making their way towards the opening provided by Rock. Izuku looked back as he felt the ground rumble, and saw that Uraraka wasn't giving up without a fight. A large barrage of cement pillars were quickly making their way towards them. It would be upon them in seconds, and crush them like grapes. But not if Izuku had anything to say about it. In an instant, he used his quirk to propel himself towards the oncoming pillars. Once he was close enough, he threw his hands out before him, shouting as the explosions erupted from his palms. The blast destroyed the pillars in an instant, but Uraraka wasn't done. He continued to build more pillars, but Izuku continued his assault. The longer he could keep it up, the more time he could buy for his colleagues to escape. Suddenly, the walls began to open up around them. Izuku stopped his attack as he and the other heroes looked around. "What is he planning now?" shouted the police chief in confusion. As if in answer to his question, several walls rose out of the ground, separating the heroes into several groups. Izuku felt something grab onto him and pull him out of the way of the wall. He looked up to see Oliver and Eraserhead standing over him. "Great," said Oliver exasperatedly. He walked over to the wall and struck it with his hand. "This wall isn't very thick. We could probably smash through with enough force." "Be careful," came Nightie's voice from the other side of the wall. "It's no accident that they did this." "What do you mean?" came Rocklock's voice from the wall to the right. "What I mean is this is the second wave," said Nightie. "They're going to come at us with everything they got." Rocklock growled in frustration as he surveyed his surroundings. Things were falling apart. They were getting separated, and the plan was going to pieces. Even after all his meticulous planning and calling in the Justice League, Night-Eye wasn't able to keep up with these mobsters. He was shaken out of his thoughts when he heard a sound behind him. It sounded like shoes clapping against the floor. The same sound someone makes when they are skipping. He turned sharply to the source of the noise to see a young woman in a schoolgirl uniform lunging towards him, brandishing a knife. He only managed to get his hand up to block the attack in time, but the knife plunged through the palm of his hand. He ignored the pain and delivered a powerful uppercut to the girl's abdomen. To his shock, the girl exploded in a mass of clay. Before he had time to recover, he felt a hand grasp his mouth from behind him. And after that, searing pain. A loud scream emanated from the walls around them. They immediately knew that it belonged to Rocklock. "Rock!" shouted Eraserhead. "What happened?" "Out of the way, Eraser!" shouted Izuku. He lifted his hands and blasted the wall down, allowing them to walk through. They stopped and stared in horror at the scene before them. Two Rocklocks, one of them on the floor on his stomach with a large knife wound in the back, and another standing over him. "Quick, help!" shouted the Rocklock that was standing. "This fake appeared out of nowhere and jumped me." Eraserhead and Arrow quickly ran to the fallen Rocklock to inspect him. As the other Rocklock began to approach him, Izuku had a bad feeling well up in his chest. "Izuku," said Rocklock. "Are you okay?" What was your first impression of me? Said Izuku sharply. Rocklock paused. What? He asked, confused. When we first met, Izuku told him. What was your first impression of me? Rocklock was silent for a few moments before a smile broke out across his face. I thought you were a nice young man, why? Izuku lifted his hands immediately and blasted Rocklock across the room. Wrong, said Izuku. Aizawa and Oliver immediately stood, the former using his quirk on the other Rocklock while the latter leveled an arrow at him. Immediately, the fake Rocklock's skin seemed to melt off of him, revealing a young woman underneath that Izuku recognized all too well. Himiko Toga, he said. Oh, Izuku, darling, you remember me? She said, smiling maniacally. I'm so happy to see you again. So happy! She threw the knife she was carrying towards Izuku, who deftly deflected it with his armored wrist bracers. Oliver fired his arrow, and the head erupted into a mesh net, wrapping itself around Toga. She glared at Oliver and Aizawa. Trying to spoil our moment, she said. She produced another knife and cut herself free from the binding before doing a back handspring away from them. As she did, a wall came from the ceiling and closed between them. This teamwork, said Aizawa. This is bad. The League and the Hisaikai have a framework for cooperation set up. But he didn't have time to worry about that. Rocklock was in trouble. If they didn't stop the bleeding soon, he would. Aizawa paused as he turned to face Rocklock, only to see Izuku standing over him, injecting him with the same medical foam that Bruce had used on him back at the training camp. Immediately the bleeding halted. Next, Izuku pulled out a syringe and injected it into Rocklock's arm, causing him to stir from his unconscious state. What happened? He said. What did you give me? Morphine, said Izuku. And coagulation foam to stop the bleeding. It should keep you alive until you reach a hospital. Izuku, are you all right? Said Oliver, sidling up to him. How did you see through her? Because I fought her back at the licensing test, said Izuku. What? Said Aizawa. What do you mean? Shape-shifting quirks aren't that common, said Izuku. Upon seeing two Rocklocks, I knew something was wrong, so I decided to test him. My suspicions were confirmed after I saw Toga change. It was the exact same quirk as the girl I fought back at the licensing exam. She was Himiko Toga all along. This was disturbing news. It meant that the League of Villains was watching Izuku. Oliver knew that Shigaraki had a sick fixation on Izuku since the incident at the USJ. He had seen firsthand the damage that a shapeshifter can do, considering he was good friends with one. If they had a shapeshifter on their side, then who knows where they may have been able to infiltrate. We have to get back to the others, said Oliver. If the Hisaikai has sided with the League of Villains, who knows how many of them are here? Shigaraki himself might be here. Twice stumbled throughout the empty hallway of the Hisaikai base. He had taken the Rappa clone and engaged Sir Night-Eye and the officers. Even though it was just a copy, he expected Rappa to be more than enough to handle some businessman in a suit and his team of government lackeys. He couldn't have been more wrong. Night-Eye had taken down the Rappa clone with impressive speed and accuracy, only earning a tear in his suit for his efforts. In a flash, he had thrown one of those heavy seals at his face, tearing his mask. Without backup, Twice knew it was foolish to continue the attack and ran for his life. Now, with his mask torn, he felt as if his head was going to split in two. He had to cover his face somehow. If he let this continue, he would be broken in twain, and never be whole again. He felt something wrap around his face, looking up to see Himiko standing over him, having covered the tear in his mask with a pink cloth. It's okay, she said, kneeling down and holding his face. You're whole again. Himiko, Twice said softly. It's okay, she said again. I know you carry the most blame for what happened to Big Sis Mag. But you shouldn't carry it alone. But don't worry. Everything is going according to plan. A few days earlier. I want Kurojiri or Toga. And maybe Babai Gawara. Chisaki and Shigaraki were sitting in the conference room, playing a game of shogi. It was Chisaki's favorite pastime to play with the boss when he was well, and he didn't get to play it that much anymore. Shigaraki didn't seem to have the patience for it, and was hesitant to play, but Chisaki wanted to make a point. In shogi, you could steal pieces from your opponent, and he knew he couldn't trust Shigaraki as far as he could throw him, and needed to clip his wings. He would feel much more at ease having 2 or 3 of Shigaraki's strongest players taking orders from him. "And why should I give them to you?" said Shigaraki lazily. "Think reasonably, Shigaraki," said Chisaki. "Your members are important to you, aren't they? Right now, there is ill will between us, despite me being forthcoming with my plan. Now you must offer something important to me in return, if we are to build trust between us." Shigaraki didn't answer, only staring at Chisaki through his hand mask attached to his face. Only one eye was visible, but Chisaki could almost see the analysis going through his mind as he stared back into his lifeless red iris. A second later, Shigaraki began to chuckle lightly. "You think too highly of yourself," he said. "You have offered me nothing tangible to earn my trust. I am interested in this quirk cure. I want to know how it works. And I want to see it in action." "Then perhaps I should use it on you," said Chisaki. He snapped his fingers and his white-robed henchman drew a pistol, pointing it squarely at Shigaraki, who looked unfazed. "Perhaps experiencing its effects firsthand will convince you of its worth." "It's not only me that you have to convince," said Shigaraki. "What are you talking about?" said Chisaki. "For as mighty as you make your little gang seem, there is one thing that is obvious that you lack," said Shigaraki smugly. "Money. You lack the capital to fund your war machine. The drugs you produce are barely enough to keep this operation of yours afloat. You need a sponsor." Chisaki said nothing. It was true, the rise of heroes in the world put a strong halt in Yakuza operations. What was once among the most feared names in the criminal underworld was reduced to nothing but petty theft and drug trafficking, and Chisaki was desperate to see them restored to their former glory, by any means necessary. But in order to do that, they needed to eliminate the heroes that stood in their way, and his research could do just that. But he needed money to further his research to mass-produce the cure. "What is your point?" asked Chisaki. "My master had many friends," said Shigaraki. "The day he was captured, he sent the League away to escape custody of the police, but he didn't just send us anywhere. Once we had arrived on the other side of Kurogiri's warp gate, someone was waiting for us." After the Kamino Ward incident, Shigaraki hit the ground hard and watched as the warp gate disappeared before his eyes. He rushed over to Kurogiri, desperate for him to open another warp gate, but it was no use, as he was still unconscious. His master was fighting Almight, their greatest enemy, and there was nothing he could do to help him. And it was all Midoriya's doing. "That brat," snarled Shigaraki. "That damn brat! I'll kill him! I'll kill him, the bat, and everyone they care about. I love your enthusiasm." Shigaraki turned suddenly as he heard a voice speak beside him. He had been so caught up in the fight that he failed to notice that he had no idea where his master had sent them. All he could see was that he was in a large office of some kind, with fine and intricate paintings and antiques lining the room. There was a large desk in front of a large window that was overlooking the city below, but he was unsure what city he was looking at, as it did not look familiar to him. His comrades were strewn in various places across the office, with a few of them still unconscious, but others, like Toga, rousing their faculties. Sitting in a chair behind the desk was a man that Shigaraki did not recognize. He wore what looked to be an expensive black suit and red tie, and gazed at them with piercing green eyes. His elbows were resting on the desk, his fingers interlocked with a pondering expression on his face. He wore a large green ring on his finger that looked as if it was radiating its own light source. Shigaraki could tell that this man was not Japanese. If he had to guess, he could peg this man as either American or European. Despite this, he spoke impeccable Japanese. "You must be Tamura Shigaraki," said the man. "I've heard a lot about you." "Who the hell are you?" Shigaraki snapped. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't kill you." "You're not very bright, are you?" said the man. "You really think that it's a good idea to kill the man your master sent you to see?" Shigaraki paused. The man had a point. You still haven't answered my question. The man smiled. I'm a man who knows many things, he said. I know that All for One has been raising you to take his place. I know that right now he is fighting for his life against his archenemy, the Japanese symbol of peace, Almight. And I know that he is going to lose. What did you say? Snarled Shigaraki, finally standing. How dare you say that? What the hell gives you the right to say such a thing? Common sense, said the man plainly. Your master sent you away because he knows that he cannot win against All Might. He has no intention of winning. He knows there is no escape for him. He just wants the world to see that their symbol is broken beyond repair. How do you know that? It's like I told you before, I know many things, the man said impatiently. Do try to keep up, will you? This is getting tiresome. So what the hell do you want with us? Said Shigaraki. I'm here to take over where your master left off, said the man. Did you really think that you were the only supervillain organization in the world? Did you really think that your master was the only powerful player? Your master and I have known each other for a long time. I believe that he is the key to humanity's survival, the next step in human evolution. An evolution that I will control. You. Me and my associates, yes, said the man. And who are your associates? Said Shigaraki. Ah, not yet, said the man, waving a disapproving finger at him. I'm a businessman, boy, and you don't get to be where I am today by revealing trade secrets to just anyone. If you want to join me, first I have to be sure that you're worth my time. How dare you? Snarled Shigaraki, approaching the man. I could destroy you and this entire building in an instant. You are beneath me, an insignificant speck on the... In an instant, two robotic arms appeared from nowhere and grabbed onto Shigaraki's hands, pulling them upward. He looked back to see a large green and purple robotic suit standing over him, its metal hands holding his arms at the wrist, restricting his movements. Shigaraki was stunned, as the suit had no occupant that he could see, and it completely immobilized him. His comrades who were conscious gasped in shock and attempted to come to his aid, but the man at the desk held his hand up to stop them. I know how your quirk works, young man, he said. You have to touch an object with all 5 fingers for it to activate. If you were to lose your hands or any one of those fingers, you would be as defenseless as a child. You wouldn't dare, said Shigaraki, horrified. That depends entirely on your next move, said the man, standing from behind the desk. Your little band of miscreants, your so-called League of Villains, is small time compared to the rest of the world. Even your master knew that you had no chance of standing against the Justice League as you currently are. You lack support, you lack funding, and most of all, you lack brains. That's why he sent you to me. And what are you going to do to help us? Asked Shigaraki. The man smiled. I'm going to level the playing field. So, you already have a sponsor in mind? Said Chisaki, frustration building in his voice. Why didn't you say something before? Our friend is a busy man, said Shigaraki simply. He has no time to waste on amateurs. However, your next quirk-disabling drug works as well as you claim. He may be interested in funding your research. I'll lend you Toga twice. My friend may be a patient man, but I'm not. Try not to waste my time. Chisaki glared at Shigaraki. He didn't like it one bit, but the latter now held all the cards. Chisaki desperately needed funding to mass-produce the quirk-erasing drug, and it would take precious time to bring in an investor on his own, time that he doesn't have. That was the whole reason he went to the League of Villains in the first place. Their street cred was high in the criminal underground, and he figured it would present them with a greater opportunity for funding if they were involved with the Hisaikai. It appears that not only was his hunch correct, but Shigaraki already has someone who is interested. He needed to play this out right. You can tell your friend that he won't be disappointed, he said. Excuse me, gentlemen. You and I need to have a talk about Eri. Lemillion. The name that Mirio Togata hoped would be synonymous with hope. The hero who would save 1,000,000 people. That was his dream. But how was he supposed to achieve his dream? How was he supposed to save anyone, if he couldn't even save a little girl from the hands of her barbarous captors? That changes today. Togata stood before two individuals in one of the hallways. One of them was the source of all the trouble, the quarry the heroes were trying desperately to get to, Kai Chisaki Overhaul. He had managed to track him down. The other Togata remembered from the briefing as his right-hand man, who was carrying the frightened little girl in his arms. It was obvious that he and his crony in the white cloak were planning on making their escape with Eri during the chaos upstairs. He wasn't about to let that happen. "I'm surprised you got here so fast," said Chisaki with a bored voice. "I took a shortcut," said Togata. "Give me the girl." "So you've decided to play hero after all, schoolboy?" said Chisaki. "Unfortunately for you, this girl doesn't want to come with you." "Perhaps I haven't made myself clear," said Togata. "I'm taking this girl with me, and you're going to jail." "Perhaps I haven't made myself clear," said Chisaki. "You're going to die down here." Togata fell over as he suddenly felt his head begin to swim. His balance was completely off, and he was seeing double. "What's happening?" he said as he tried to steady himself. "You feelin' sloshed?" A voice came from above him. He looked up to see a strange man hanging from the rafters, drinking heavily from a bottle of sake. Togata deduced that he was the source of his sudden vertigo, and had to get away from him quickly. His ears twitched a second later as he heard the sound of a gun clicking, dashing to the side just in the nick of time as a man in a black mask and fedora was standing in front of him. He tried to shoot Togata again, but he dodged it just in time. "What is your quirk?" said the man. "Permeation," said Togata suddenly. "I can pass through anything once it's activated." He placed his hand over his mouth. Why did he tell him that? "I see," said the man in the fedora. "So, that explains how you were able to get here so soon." "How could you miss him?" said the drinking man. "Are you drunk?" "That would be you," said the man in the fedora. "I suggest you stop criticizing and assist your superior in dealing with this interloper." "I get it," said Togata. "Your quirk must have forced the truth out of me. You're not like the others we fought before. You seem like too important a player to be on the front lines." "You're right," said the fedora man. "I'm better than those useless pawns above us. I'm the only one who sees the boss' true ambition." "Torturing his daughter for his experiments is ambition to you," said Togata, disgusted. "Poor fool," said the fedora man. "You're letting your emotions cloud your judgment. You're no hero. You just want to ease your guilty conscience." He leveled his gun back at Togata. "Now die, you nuisance!" In a flash, Togata took a breath and melded into the wall next to him, surprising both his attackers. A second later, faster than either of them could see, he was ejected from the wall next to them, where he clotheslined them and knocked them both out in a single hit. Chisaki turned back to the source of the noise behind him, confused as it sounded like screams from his men. His thoughts were confirmed as both of his men had fallen, and the insipid hero was gone. "Hunting!" The young boss quickly tilted his head, narrowly missing a swift kick to his face. He could feel the blood trail from an open wound where the hero's boot managed to nick him. He was surprised. He managed to get past his men and draw first blood. His surprise continued as he watched, seemingly in slow motion, the hero's foot pass through Eri's face, as if it was simply a hologram, only for it to become solid again upon connecting with Kurono, knocking him aloft, and causing him to drop Eri. Immediately, the hero grasped the little girl, holding her away from Chisaki protectively. "No, don't!" shouted Eri. "Run away and leave me! He'll kill you if you don't!" "Not gonna happen, Eri," said Togata. "I swear he won't ever hurt you again. I'm here now, and I will stop him." "You touched me," Chisaki said, his voice low and venomous. "You filthy vermin! You actually touched me!" Togata stood defiantly as he carried Eri. Chisaki seemed to be having some sort of episode. His voice had changed from the bored drawl he usually spoke with to a deep, guttural growl. "Come back here, Eri," said Chisaki. "How many times do I have to tell you? It's your fault. It's all your fault. You break people. That's just how you were born." "Don't listen to him, Eri," said Togata. You're a curse, Eri, said Chisaki. I always have to get my hands dirty because of you. Every action you take results in people dying. The poor child began to shake and sob uncontrollably in Togata's arms, making his own blood boil with rage and hatred. How could you say that about your own daughter? Togata shouted. Huh? Said Chisaki, confused. Oh yeah, that's the story I told you, isn't it? She's not my daughter. Togata gasped as he saw that Chisaki had removed one of his gloves, placing it on the floor. The structures around him immediately broke down, only to be reformed into sharp spikes, protruding from the ground and rushing towards Togata at alarming speeds. He only just had enough time to activate his quirk, holding Eri above the spikes to keep her from danger. He could have killed her, but he didn't care. Please, said Chisaki. Don't even bother trying to save her. If she got hurt, I could just put her back together and revive her, even if she isn't quite like the way she was before. So long as she's intact, she is useful to me. You monster, shouted Togata. I'm going to tear you limb from limb. And what happens if Eri gets hurt? Said Chisaki as he continued his attack. Only I can heal her. You can't escape through permeation with her in your arms, and I've sealed off your escape. There's nothing you can do, hero. Give up. Togata looked to the right and saw that Kurono was standing, leveling a gun at him. He knew that Kurono's quirk was powerful, and he needed to be careful to make sure Eri didn't get hurt. As Kurono fired, Togata turned his back and covered shielded Eri, using his billowing cape to obscure his vision. And here I thought heroes only wore capes because they looked cool, said Kurono. Chisaki watched as the red blob that was his cape got smaller. His eyes widened in realization. Kurono! He shouted to his aide, but it was too late. Togata had already permeated through the floor and got the drop on them, knocking the gun out of Kurono's hand. That was unexpected. He is strong, but he also just put Eri down. This was his chance to get her back. He reached down and placed his hand on the floor, ready to break the ground and kill Eri. Once she was broken, he would kill this interloper and revive her. But before he could use his quirk, he saw Togata arise from the ground out of the corner of his eye. He raised his hand to protect himself from Togata's punch, but his fist went right through his hand and connected hard with his face, sending Chisaki hard to the ground. A hero wears a cape to comfort those in need, said Togata. You may be good overhaul. You are strong. But at the end of the day, you're just a Yakuza thug, and I'm stronger than you. Togata's onslaught continued, knocking Chisaki and Kurono around like bowling pins. He was too fast. Chisaki couldn't hope to use his quirk at this rate. He had to do something to put the odds back in his favor. The boss, the Hisaikai, everyone was depending on him. He will not fail them. Master! Togata paused to see the man in the fedora was conscious, having crawled through the cracks in the wall to get to Chisaki. In an instant, Chisaki threw a small case towards him. Nemoto! Shoot now! He shouted. Nemoto took the case and drew a large revolver. He placed a large red cartridge with a small needle at the end in the gun and leveled it at Eri. Togata's eyes widened with horror. This poor girl, who he failed to rescue the first time he met her, who suffered so much at the hands of a sadistic man and who held every death at the hands of Chisaki on her shoulders, was in trouble. Togata acted on instinct, leaping in front of her as the gun fired. He will never let her be hurt again. He will never fail her again. He felt the needle embed into his back, and a strange sensation pulsed throughout his body. He felt as if a part of him was dying, being drained from his body like a stopper had been pulled from his very soul. He fell to the earth, still holding Eri. Overhaul began to laugh maniacally as Togata struggled to get to his feet. Do you know how quirks came to be? Said Chisaki. Quirks are not natural. They are an illness. In my research I have found and isolated the cells that are responsible for the manifestation of quirks. Cells that only appeared 100 years ago. They are not native to the human body. That means there is only one logical conclusion. They are a disease. A disease that has spread to most of the people of the world. Some of its symptoms are beneficial, some of them are not. People think it is the next stage of evolution, but all they are is sick people, and I aim the cure. Eri held on to Togata, checking him worriedly as he sat on all fours, breathing heavily. Chisaki began to approach them. "It's ironic, isn't it?" he said. "You came here to save this girl, and she will be the end of everything. All quirks will be cured, starting with yours. You have lost. You're powerless." He thrust his hand to the floor, ready to use his quirk, but was forced back as the unconscious body of Kurono was thrown at him. As he dodged it, he felt a heavy punch connect with his face. Togata was on his feet, dodging every attack thrown by Chisaki, while every blow of his was connecting with the Yakuza boss. With each blow he grew angrier and angrier. This couldn't be happening. Togata's quirk was gone. How could he possibly still be stronger than him? "I am not powerless!" shouted Togata. "I am. Still. Lemillion!" Chapter 67, Overhaul Strikes Back. Izuku, Oliver, Night Eye, and several more heroes and police officers were standing around the misshapen rocky mass that was once the Hasaikai hideout's inner hallways. They had managed to finally subdue the man shifting the corridors around them, one of the Hasaikai enforcers named Mimic. "Finally got you, you son of a hitch," said Fatgum triumphantly. Mimic said nothing, but began foaming at the mouth as if rabid, a look of deep hatred plastered on his face. "What the hell?" the police captain said in confusion. "It looks like the drugs are wearing off," Aizawa said, stepping forward. "What drugs?" the captain asked. Izuku immediately stepped forward, pulling a syringe from his utility belt and sticking it in the arm of their captor. Everyone stared in surprise as the boy withdrew a small amount of blood from the man. "What the hell are you doing, kid?" the captain said. "You can't just draw blood from people." But Izuku wasn't listening. He pulled another device from his belt and placed a droplet of blood on it. The device was about the size of a smartphone and had a small computer screen connected to it. He began typing into the device before nodding in confirmation. "Just as I thought," he said grimly. "Arrow, come look at the chemical compound." The green arrow walked over and took a look at the screen. "I got AD in chemistry in high school, kid," he said. "What am I looking at here?" "That's the base compound found in the street steroid venom," Izuku said. "If you look at the other chemical compounds that are with it, it has the signature of the Titan formula." "So we were right, they are using Titan," Green Arrow said. "It's been heavily modified, but at its core it's the same formula," Izuku said. "Overhaul is no fool, he must have found a way to alter it. If he got these on the streets, who knows what kind of havoc they could cause," the police captain said. "We'll worry about that later," Aizawa said. "Remember, we also have Twice and Toga to deal with. We don't know how many members of the League of Villains are here, so we have to be vigilant." "Toga," Mimic growled in a low voice. He began to grow agitated, thrashing about at his bindings. "Toga and Twice! You traitors! I'll never forgive you!" "Where are the other League members hiding?" Night Eye asked. "I don't know," shouted Mimic. "But I'll hunt down every last one of them. I won't stop until I have crushed their skulls into dust." "Looks like those two are the only ones here for now," Night Eye said. "Why did they betray their own allies like that?" asked a police officer. "Maybe they weren't allies after all," said another. "Maybe," said the police captain. "But we have to assume that they are not on our side either. We can't let them escape." Izuku was ready to start moving when he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Aizawa, giving him a stern look. Izuku remembered back to after the briefing, how he had warned him and his classmates that if the League was involved, they would be pulled from the case. But they were so close to saving Eri, Izuku wouldn't even think about retreating now. "Eraserhead," Izuku began. "What are you fools standing around for?" Rocklock shouted, getting their attention. "Let the cops deal with the League. You need to save the girl and stop Overhaul. Complete the mission at all costs." "He's right," the police captain said. "We'll take the League from here. Your top priority is to the mission." "I'll stay here and keep an eye on this piece of crap," said Rocklock, nodding to Mimic. In an instant, the heroes and cops broke off, sprinting down the broken hallway before them. Rocklock sighed, wincing slightly at his injury. Many wondered why he was so antagonistic towards the kids, but the truth was, he was simply worried for their safety. In his opinion, this was too big of a mission, too dangerous of a mission, to entrust to school kids, UA or not. He had a wife and son waiting for him back home, so he knew the value of life, and the terror when one is about to meet their doom. These kids were too young for that. But it was too late now. They were involved whether they liked it or not. Now it was up to them, the pro-heroes, to guide them to complete the mission, and above all else, keep them safe. Twice and Toga were kneeling on a concrete ledge, having watched the heroes and cops down below them run off towards their mission. Toga looked wistfully at Izuku as he took off. He was most likely going to get really bloodied up in this battle. She wanted desperately to see that, but they had more important things to worry about. So what are we going to do, Toga? Twice asked as they crawled along the ledge. Now that the cops and heroes are gone, maybe we should make a break for it, meet up with Shigaraki? No, said Toga. Izuku is going after Overhaul. As much as I want to be there to see it, we need to focus on what's more important right now. What's that? Asked Twice. Making Overhaul cry like a baby, Toga said with a dark look in her eyes. In that case, I have no clue what to do, Twice said in a deep voice. Suddenly, he perked up and said in a higher voice, Here's what we're going to do. He whispered into Toga's ear, who had a devilish smile sprout on her face. Perfect. Mirio Togata was bleeding profusely, his side and shoulder having been pierced by one of the stone spires that sprouted from Overhaul's attack. He no longer had the benefit of his quirk, and he realized how vulnerable he was without it. Still, Eri was counting on him, and even if it cost him his life, he would be there to defend her. You're sick, said Overhaul manically. You're all sick, and I'm the cure. He reached down to the floor beneath him, ready to press his attack against Togata, when the wall beside them suddenly burst open with a mighty explosion. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the black smoke and bright flash of an explosion, and recognized it immediately. Get away from them, you bastard! Shouted Izuku, using the momentum from his explosion to propel him at breakneck speeds towards Overhaul, landing a fist on the crook of his elbow. He heard a sickening snap as Overhaul screamed in pain as he was sent hurtling across the room. Following close behind him was Green Arrow, Eraserhead, and Sir Night Eye. Eraserhead immediately used his quirk to restrict Overhaul's quirk. Night Eye ran at full speed towards Mirio, who looked to be barely able to stand. Get Eri, he said weakly. She's behind me. He moved slightly to show the frightened form of Eri, staring in horror at Mirio's battered condition. Sir Night Eye immediately embraced the both of them. Rest now, he said. I've got you. Everything will be alright. Shisaki desperately hit the ground with his non-broken arm, but his powers were restricted. Izuku, Eraserhead and Arrow immediately advanced on him. Shisaki is back to a corner, shouted Arrow, drawing his bow. Let's end this now. Aizawa saw at the corner of his eye a flash of white, coming quickly towards them. Aizawa used his bindings to push Izuku out of the way before the white object sliced against his arm, cutting open a small flesh wound. As it did, he felt his body go rigid, and his movements began to slow, as if someone had put him in slow motion. Aizawa and Arrow looked and saw that Chrono, Chisaki's right-hand man, had used his quirk to attack them while he was still incapacitated on the ground, a gigantic white arrow sprouting from his hood and stretching towards the heroes. My quirk will slow you heroes down, said Chrono. Too bad I couldn't get all of you. Aizawa couldn't control his movements, as his reactions were too slow. He was horrified to feel that his eye was slowly closing in a blink. He tried to fight it, but it was too late, his eye had closed. The floor around the heroes erupted in a sea of spikes and pillars. Overhaul's powers had returned, and his attack had leveled the playing field, causing the heroes to balk in their advance on him. You won't stop my plans, shouted Overhaul. You sick people, I won't let my work be undone here. He looked down to see the fallen body of one of his minions, Shin Nemoto, a loyal follower, who would gladly give his life for the cause. He reached down and touched his face, feeling his very atoms split apart as he pulled his final trump card. Izuku watched in horror at the sight before him. The body of Nemoto disappeared, and Chisaki began to writhe and yell in pain as 2 more arms sprouted from his body. But as they did, all 4 of his arms transformed into large, gnarled appendages with large, clawed hands at each end. "I admire your tenacity, heroes," said Chisaki. "Especially you, Lemillion. I admit that you are stronger than me. But I've come too far to be stopped. Now, give me back Eri!" Izuku was horrified. Chisaki was a madman, and if anything proved it, it was this. He looked around the room, taking stock of the situation. Night Eye was a distance away, protecting Eri and Togata. Aizawa and Oliver were nowhere to be found in the wreckage. He was on his own. "You're crazy, Chisaki!" shouted Izuku. "Destroying yourself and merging with your minion. You keep talking about how we're the sick ones, but you're the only sick creature here." "A necessary loss," said Chisaki. "When people infect me with their touch, I lose control. You only have yourselves to blame. You were the ones to get involved with Eri, with me, and now Lemillion has lost his quirk forever because of it." "What?" shouted Izuku. "If only you had given up sooner," said Chisaki smugly. "You could have held on to your pathetic dreams. And now, you will die along with your friends." Overhaul used his own arms to launch himself forward with impressive speed, heading towards Mirio, Night Eye, and Eri. He would be upon them in seconds, and they were defenseless. Overhaul felt an explosion next to him, forcing him off his attack. Izuku was standing between him and his friends, a batarang in one hand and an electric brass knuckle in the other. "You will not touch them again!" he shouted. "Toys and explosions?" Chisaki said, laughing. "That's all that you have to stand against me. You're pathetic." He reached down and launched another spiked pillar at him, which Izuku deftly dodged. Suddenly, Night Eye leapt from the pillars he, Mirio, and Eri were hiding behind, running at full speed towards Overhaul. "I'll take care of him!" Night Eye shouted, throwing the weighted seals at Overhaul. "Take care of Mirio and Eri!" Izuku knew better than to argue, immediately moving towards the upperclassman and the frightened girl. Overhaul had taken one of the seals to one of his malformed arms, causing it to shatter. As he quickly tried to reform it, Night Eye advanced on him. "You destroy other people's quirks so freely, but when the tables are turned you become frightened," Night Eye mocked Overhaul. "You're a coward. A measly worm who was so frightened of my protege that he was forced to use one of his most prized bullets to remove him of his quirk, just to level the playing field in his favor. You're pathetic." Overhaul roared, lunging towards Night Eye. In an instant, Night Eye activated his quirk, and was able to see every attack Overhaul was planning. Utilizing this, he was able to dodge Overhaul's attacks with relative ease. As he did, his mind moved back to his conversation with Gran Torino back at his agency. He was asked why he was so against using his quirk to look further than an hour into the future. The truth was, no matter how many times he tested it, no matter what he did, every single vision came to pass exactly as he saw it. Even if he changed his actions to be different from the way they were in the vision, everything would somehow balance out, causing the vision to come true somehow. This led him to believe that his quirk did more than just predict the future. Perhaps he was the cause of the future. Perhaps that vision came true because of his quirk. And that thought terrified him, especially since his vision of All Might. Ever since then, he worked and worked to perfect his quirk, to desperately prove that he was wrong, that the result of his visions could be changed, only to grow more frustrated and despondent when they were proven correct in the end. And you can flip a coin 100 times and have it land on heads each and every time. But so long as you keep flipping, there's always the chance it will come up tails. Madame Xanadu's words flashed through his mind. Was he really neglecting his full potential? Was his fear that he somehow was causing All Might's demise restricting him from seeing the truth? He had to know. In an instant, he used foresight to look further into the future. He didn't need to look far, just using repeating second incrementing to. His eyes widened in shock. He had seen the future, and it frightened him to his core. "Lemillion, Eri, how badly are you injured?" Izuku said, finally reaching the pair. Lemillion looked horrible, blood leaking from various parts of his body. He was trembling, weaving left and right, looking as if he could barely stand. Izuku immediately reached into his utility belt and used his medical foam to pack off the largest injury, but because he had used so much on Rock Lock, he didn't have enough to patch every wound. "I'm fine," Lemillion said. "But I failed you, Eri. I made you sad again. I couldn't keep my promise." "That doesn't matter right now," said Izuku. "We have to get away from Chisaki." He looked to his left, spying the wall a few feet away from them. "Get behind these pillars," he instructed the two, who immediately complied. Izuku ran towards the wall, placing explosive gel and running back behind the pillar. The wall exploded upon pressing the detonator. He, Eri and Mirio began walking towards the hole in the wall, leading into the hallways, when Eri suddenly stopped. "No," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "That's enough. I can't do it." "What are you talking?" Izuku was interrupted by a sickening squelching sound, followed by a gargled scream. They turned to the source, staring in horror at the scene before them. There stood Sir Night-Eye, standing before Overhaul, having been impaled in the arm and abdomen by two spiked pillars. "Sir!" shouted Mirio. "No!" Izuku didn't hesitate. He immediately used his quirk to propel him towards Overhaul, blasting him with a howitzer impact. Overhaul was broken to pieces, but immediately began to heal himself. Izuku threw a smokescreen before him, followed by several explosive batarangs, which embedded themselves into Chisaki's arms before exploding. "Haven't you figured it out yet?" shouted Chisaki as his arms repaired themselves. "You've lost. You're all going to die." "Don't count on it," Izuku countered. "No future is fixed, and nothing is set in stone. No matter what, even if you think the future is already decided, I'll blow that future out of the water." "It appears that the tide has turned," said Chrono, watching the fight through a small crack in the wall. He had used his quirk on the hero Eraserhead below him, and he was moving at a snail's pace. Chrono slowly drew a knife. He had to end this hero quickly and help the boss. They had to retrieve the girl and leave this place quickly. They had to rebuild. Restart everything. Chrono yelled in pain as he felt something pierce this raised hand, causing him to drop the knife. The momentum of whatever it was had carried him towards the wall, causing him to crash into it. Dazed, he looked up to see that his hand was pierced by an arrow, which had embedded itself in the wall. Suddenly, several more arrows came flying towards him, striking key points of his clothes, pinning him to the wall. To his shock, he could see the hero green arrow approach him out of his peripheral vision. "Try not to look so surprised," the arrow said before knocking him unconscious. With Chrono incapacitated, the green arrow ran towards the fallen Eraserhead. He was still under the effect of the quirk, and didn't know how much longer he would be affected. "Stay here, try not to move too much," said the arrow to Aizawa. "Oh, very funny," Aizawa said slowly. Green Arrow found a small opening he was able to squeeze through. What he saw horrified him. Night-Eye was speared upon two pillars, losing blood quickly. Arrow was surprised he wasn't dead yet. In the middle of the room was Izuku, squaring off against a horrifyingly deformed Overhaul. The boy was injured, having been speared in his arm and leg by smaller pillars, but was still standing. Oliver was worried. His first instinct was to back up Izuku, but if he didn't move quickly, Night-Eye wouldn't last much longer, and could die before help could be provided for him. There were no other heroes or officers to offer support, and they were out of options. Suddenly, an idea popped into his head. He reached into his utility belt and pulled out a small plunger syringe, attachable to an arrow that would administer to the target on contact. The arrow usually filled these with anesthesia to knock out enemies during stealth missions. This time, it was filled with the substance that Bruce had given him, should the worst come to pass. Currently, the mission was in jeopardy, and more importantly, Izuku was in danger. If there was ever a time to use it, now was the time. He quickly attached it to an arrow and drew it back in his bow, pointing it at the boy. He only hoped his aim would be true, and that whatever was in this, it would turn the tide back in their favor. "Give up, kid," said Chisaki. "No matter how hard you hit me, I'll just put myself back together. You're almost spent. Give up or die. Never, said Izuku defiantly. Just like your friend before you. Chisaki sneered at Izuku. He didn't want to give up either. And now, he'll die, and you will die along with him. Suddenly, a large mouth formed on the palm of one of the giant, malformed hands and began to shout so loud that Izuku had to cover his ears. Did you hear that, Eri? Another person is about to die because of you. Stop being so foolish and come back now, before you hurt anyone else. Izuku felt his blood boil. You bastard! Izuku spat. Don't you dare speak to her. I'll make sure you never use your quirk to hurt others again, ugh! Izuku felt something hit him on the back right shoulder. Surprised, he looked behind him and saw it was an arrow attached to a syringe that was injecting some sort of serum into him. He looked back to see Green Arrow, who still had his bow raised, and began firing arrows at Chisaki, who jumped back to dodge them. Izuku doubled over, a strange feeling entering his body. He felt as if his body was suddenly coursing with enough energy to power a city. His body began to shake as he felt the sheer electric power course through his veins. He drew back, letting out a yell as his body began to glow, a green electricity sparking over his body. He looked himself over as the power continued to grow. He felt good. He felt great. He felt powerful. Almight sat alone at his desk at UA High School. It was late in the evening, and he had fallen behind on grading papers. Truth was, he was worried about Izuku, getting his first hero assignment, and with his old sidekick nonetheless. He knew that Izuku had faced dangerous hero situations before, especially with the incident in Gotham a while ago, but it still caused him to worry. Suddenly, All Might drew back, gasping for breath and clutching his chest. He felt strange, as if he was suddenly being drained of energy, as if part of his very life force was suddenly leaving his body. He stumbled off of his chair and fell to his knees on the floor, breathing heavily. He raised his head in shock as he suddenly realized what had happened. One for All was gone. It had passed on. Chapter 68, One for All. Togata slowly made his way along the empty passageways of the Shai Hasaikai base. He was still bleeding, and had to prop himself against the wall for support. He was leading Eri towards the direction of the heroes and police, but they were moving at a snail's pace. At this rate, they would never make it to the heroes in time. Come on, Mirio! Togata thought as he struggled. You can do this. Don't give up. Eri is counting on you. Quirk or no, you have to get her to safety. You have to fulfill your promise to her. Togata felt his head swoon, his vision doubling. It was as if the ground was shaking beneath his feet. He fell to his knees, unable to keep himself upright anymore. This wasn't working. He was slowing Eri down. She had to go on without him. Eri, Togata said weakly. You have to keep going. Follow along this path, and you'll see a hero or a police officer eventually. They can take you to safety. You have to go on without me. Get yourself out of here. Eri said nothing, tears streaming down her eyes. She was trembling from head to toe as she looked in horror at the poor hero before her, the one who had risked and sacrificed so much for her, someone who barely knew her. Suddenly, Eri's head snapped up in alarm as she heard a familiar voice echoing loudly through the hallway. Do you hear that, Eri? Said the voice. Another person is about to die because of you. Stop being so foolish and come back now, before you hurt anyone else. Eri felt her heart drop into her stomach. Even so far away, while fighting the other heroes, Chisaki was still able to cast his shadow over her. People were getting hurt, people were dying, all because of her. Because of their efforts to save her, they were all going to die. She was killing them. She had to do something to stop it. Eri, Togata said, as if reading her mind. Don't do it! Don't listen to him! But it was too late. In a flash, Eri took off back down the hallway, towards the source of the voice. Back to him. Togata tried to stand, to stop her, but it was no use. His legs were giving out, and he couldn't keep up with her. Midoriya, Togata thought. It's up to you now. Please win. In the courtyard up above the compound, Ryuki was currently engaged in battle with one of the Hasaikai enforcers. He was a man named Katsukame, and his quirk was the ability to drain the life force out of an enemy by touching them, and converting it into raw power to increase his mass, size, and strength. He had managed to consume a quirk-enhancing drug, which was amplifying his quirk, allowing him to drain the vitality of those around him without touching them. She was battling him in her dragon form while most of her backup collapsed around her, including Froppy and Uravity. Neijire Hado was floating above Katsukame, blasting him with her shockwaves, offering her support. While they continued to battle, Uraraka tried desperately to regain her second wind. She felt as if she had to sleep for a week to regain her composure, but still struggled to her feet. Uraraka! She turned to the source of the voice calling her name, seeing Izuku standing just a short distance away. She tilted her head in confusion. She thought that he was underground, helping with the siege on the Hasaikai base. But the look on his face made her shake the confusion away. Something was wrong. "We need backup, quick!" Izuku shouted, pointing towards the street behind him. "Underground, right below the intersection over there. The others are pinned down and need help." Katsukame looked back at Izuku, distracted by his words. Ryuki seized her chance and rammed her scaled, spiky head into his abdomen, causing him to double over in pain. Uraraka rose from her stupor, placing her hand on Katsukame, causing him to float. Beside her, Tsuyu used her tongue to wrap around Katsukame's neck while Hado and Ryuki led him over to the intersection Izuku directed them to. Izuku stood tall as the energy that had entered his body continued to pulse through him. It was a feeling that he had never experienced before. It was as if his entire body was filled to the brim with an explosive light that threatened to burst at any moment. What is happening to me?" Izuku asked. Chisaki's smug look had morphed into that of concern upon seeing this newfound ability before him. He had no idea what the hooded hero had injected into the boy, perhaps some sort of quirk-enhancing drug, but he knew better than to take his chances. He had to get rid of this boy and find Eri quickly. "Parlor tricks won't save you, boy," said Chisaki. "I will kill you all the same." Izuku didn't falter, dropping down into a fighting stance. "You're welcome to try, mob rat," he said defiantly. "How dare you!" Chisaki roared indignantly. "The shy Hasaikai will not be mocked by some pretender child. Prepare to stop!" Both Izuku and Chisaki turned to the source of the voice. Izuku was horrified to see the small form of Eri standing before them. "Please stop this!" she shouted, tears in her eyes. "I'll do whatever you want, but please don't hurt anyone else." "Eri, no!" shouted Izuku. Before he could react, he felt something hard slam against his body, sending him flying away from the small girl. Chisaki had used his quirk to knock him away with a stone pillar while he was distracted. "Stay out of this, boy!" Chisaki shouted before turning his attention back to Eri. "Good girl, Eri. You came to your senses. Now come here quickly before I—" Chisaki was interrupted by a deafening explosion. The ceiling above them had caved in completely, revealing Katsukame being slammed into the ground by Ryukyu, one of the heroes that accompanied the police on the raid. "Here comes the cavalry!" shouted Green Arrow. Overhaul bristled in anger. There was no way he was prepared to take down more heroes. He had to cut his losses, grab Eri, and escape now. He slammed one of his malformed hands on the ground, causing a pillar to shoot up underneath Eri's feet, propelling her into the air. Overhaul then began lifting himself towards the hole in the ceiling using another stone pillar, catching her as he rose. "No!" shouted Izuku. He couldn't let him escape with Eri, not after all that they have done to save her. Izuku felt the power return, this time coursing through his legs. As if on instinct, Izuku pushed off the ground and was propelled at intense speeds towards Chisaki. It was both an exhilarating and frightening experience for Izuku. Whatever was happening to him had given him more ability and power than he could ever fathom. Chisaki looked back as he continued to rise to the ceiling. "Stubborn brat!" he snarled, seeing Izuku practically riding his coattails. Eri noticed as well, and she noticed something else out of the corner of her eye. It was Lemillion's torn cape. Her heart began to ache as she remembered the poor hero's sacrifice for her, giving up everything, even nearly his life, just to save her. It was her fault. She was nothing but a burden, a mistake who would get people killed. It was better this way. Away from everyone who she could hurt. Away from Eri. Eri looked around, confused. She could swear she heard someone calling her name. It was suddenly as if everything was slowing down around her, seconds turning to minutes. She heard the voice again, but it was clearer this time. It sounded like the voice of a female, with an accent that she had never heard before. Different. "Who are you?" she asked. "What's going on?" "Don't be afraid, mon cher," the voice said gently. "Use your quirk, child." "No," said Eri. "No, I can't. I have to go with Chisaki. I can't let other people get killed because of me." "Chisaki lied to you, cher," the voice assured her. "He is the killer, not you. Reach out, Eri." "I can't," said Eri sadly. "Mon cher," the voice continued. "You are a special child, and these people will never stop trying to save you, even at the cost of their own lives. If you truly wish to stop the killing, you must let them take you away from this place." "Aye," Eri said, her heart racing and tears streaming down her face. "You can do it, child," the voice continued. "It is time for you to be a hero to them. Reach out and take the cape. Unleash your quirk. Allow yourself to be free." The world began to return to normal around her. Despite herself, she reached forward towards the red cape as it drifted towards her. As it got closer, she felt her heart grow warm. She remembered the words of Lemillion, telling her the reason behind his cape, to protect her and reassure her. She could almost feel as if he was there with her right now, and that feeling of safety returned to her as she grasped the cape. Chisaki felt as if his body was being ripped asunder. He looked down at Eri and saw that her horn was glowing, causing yellow light to course throughout her body. In an instant, Nemoto was ripped from his body, and he felt himself return to normal. Eri had used her quirk, Rewind, to put him back to the way he was before he had merged with Nemoto. This had caused him to drop Eri, who was clutching the red cape. He tried to reach for her again, but he heard a popping sound, and Eri was taken away from him at alarming speeds. He looked up to see Izuku holding a grappling hook, attached at the other end of the cape, and bringing her towards him, catching her in his arms. "No!" shouted Chisaki angrily. "I've got you, Eri!" shouted Izuku. "No one will ever hurt you again!" "Give her back to me!" shouted Chisaki, using his quirk to send more spiked pillars at him. Izuku placed Eri on his back. "Hold on tight, Eri," he said. He cupped his hands and unleashed an intense blast on Chisaki below him, a blast larger than anything he had ever been capable of before. Chisaki had just barely had time to dodge the attack, but not in time to prevent his arm from being caught in the blast. His arm was instantly vaporized, and he roared in pain as he grasped it. Izuku was propelled into the sky above them, with Eri still clutching him. What just happened?" asked Ryukyu, having covered Night Eye, Green Arrow, Uravity, and Froppy to shield them from the blast. "Where's Deku?" asked Uravity. Suddenly, she saw someone emerge from the rubble several yards from them. Chisaki stood, still clutching his severed and charred arm, blood seeping down his face. In an instant, what was left of his arm was dematerialized, only for it to rematerialize a second later, good as new. "You won't get away," he said in a low, manic voice. "You belong to me, Eri. I must realize the old man's dream. I must bring back the Hasaikai to glory. I need you, Eri." He walked towards the unconscious form of Katsukame, placing his hand upon him. In an instant, he disintegrated into a mess of blood and dust. A second later, Chisaki's body began to transform, similar as he did before. "Not good!" shouted Ryukyu. "Don't worry," came the weak voice of Sir Night Eye. "He won't come after us. He's going to the surface in pursuit of Midoriya and Eri. And that will be the end of it." "What do you mean?" asked Green Arrow. "I recognize that power," said Night Eye, more to himself. "I didn't think it would pass to him, but I guess I was wrong. Still, it won't be enough." What are you talking about? Asked Uraraka. I have seen Chisaki's future, Nai replied sadly. He will kill Midoriya and escape with Eri. No, said Uraraka. No, we have to save him. She tried to use her quirk to float herself upwards out of the crater, but she immediately felt her body swoon and hit the ground. She had used up the last of her energy by bringing down Katsukame. She was too weak to use her quirk. By the time we reach him it will be too late, said Night-Eye. I'm sorry. Bullshit. Night-Eye looked over at Oliver, who was glaring at him. That's bullshit and you know it, he said. Do you know how many times my death has been foreseen? Or Batman's? And we're still here. He looked up at the ceiling. And if Midoriya is anything like his mentor, he's not going anywhere either. Izuku was still flying above the crater below, but he noticed something different. His injuries were gone, and he felt refreshed, as if he had just awoken from a good night's sleep. Eri, is this your doing? Izuku asked. Are you a healer? Eri remained silent. Before Izuku could question her further, a large rumble came from the crater below them. Izuku gasped in horror as a gigantic creature emerged from the wreckage, using its several appendages to pull itself up out of the crater. It was grotesque and misshapen, like a skeleton covered in rancid flesh. Inside a large beak-like opening at the head was top half of Chisaki, sticking out of the center of the gaping maw. She can't control her quirk, said Chisaki. She has the power to rewind people, but she can't turn it off. If you keep holding her like that, she'll erase you from existence. Didn't I tell you that girl is cursed? Now hand her over, or would you rather be annihilated? Rewind, huh? Izuku said. He looked at his hands. The blast from before had shattered his fingers due to its power, but now they were completely fine. Whatever was happening to him, this increase in power was damaging his body when used at full force. But now that he had Eri with him, she could rewind every injury he sustained. That means he has a chance to really cut loose. Lend me your power, Eri, said Izuku. Things are about to get messy. You fool, shouted Chisaki. Quirks are not natural. They are a virus. A plague that infected humanity for too long. Eri's power can rewind humanity to a time where quirks no longer existed, removing the very tainted cells that make quirks possible. Can't you see how she could change things? I can finally cure this hero's sickness. I can end this madness. Give her to me. Chisaki used his appendages to propel himself into the air towards Izuku. In turn, Izuku cupped his hands together again, feeling the power flow through him. Megaton Blast! The blast was even greater than before, erupting in a megaton explosion. Chisaki's grotesque body was blown apart, only for him to reassemble it into a different form a moment later. He then sent several spiked pillars from the city below towards him and Eri, only for Izuku to propel himself towards him with his quirk, kicking and punching the pillars into rubble as they came. He leveled his hand and blasted Chisaki again. His shattered limbs immediately repaired themselves thanks to Eri's quirk. Izuku felt Eri's quirk growing stronger. He had to end this quickly before the unthinkable happened. Chisaki reformed his body, but it wasn't as large as it was before. He felt his blood boil and his mind begin to shatter. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. This boy was ruining everything. He was like his mentor, the man who took him in. He told him pursuing drugs was foolish and dishonorable, that restoring the Hasaikai wasn't worth losing their humanity in the process. But he was short-sighted, so he had to get him out of the way. Once he destroyed this kid, and raised the Hasaikai to their rightful place, he would revive the old man, and show him how right he was. Yes, he had to show the old man. He had to get Eri back. He had to win. Chisaki launched another attack at Izuku, who used his quirk to propel himself out of the way just in time, countering with another blast. Each time he reformed himself, he had less to work with. But the boy would not let up. Each time he attacked, the boy was quick to evade and counter. In truth, Chisaki wasn't much of a fighter. He mainly used his quirk to win battles, but in this case, the boy was definitely superior to him in combat. You're a fool, Chisaki, said Izuku. You have abandoned all humanity chasing an impossible goal. Shut up! Shouted Chisaki. You were destined to lose! Shouted Izuku. From the very start! People like you will always be stopped by people like me. I will never stop until people can finally live free from terror caused by monsters like you. This I vow! Izuku appeared before Chisaki, who gasped in surprise. Starting with you! Shouted Izuku, raising his hands. Special move, Krakatoa! Chisaki felt his body crumble around him as he was enveloped in the blast, a strange, calm thought entering his mind, aware that if he hadn't had Katsukane's body protecting him when he merged with him, he would not have survived. Perhaps the boy knew that, and was counting on it. But it didn't matter anymore. His mask had melted in the blast, along with the rest of Katsukane's body, and as he fell to the earth beneath him, he was finally forced to accept the inevitable. He had failed. Uraraka and Sir Night-Eye had made it above ground, with Uraraka utilizing her quirk with Ryukyu's assistance to get them out of the crater below. They had watched the battle before them in stunned shock, with Night-Eye unable to believe what he was seeing. Impossible, he whispered. I saw it. Chisaki had escaped and killed Midoriya. I saw it so clearly in immutable future. The dust and smoke around them cleared, and the truth was laid before their eyes. Chisaki was unconscious and beaten, and Izuku stood triumphant. Night-Eye couldn't believe his eyes. The future had changed. It had really changed. Heh! Sir Night-Eye laughed, coughing up a little blood. It appears I have finally landed on tails. With that, he drifted into unconsciousness. Izuku stood amidst the rubble around him, panting heavily from his battle. He had done it. He had defeated Chisaki and rescued Eri. It was over. It was finally. Izuku doubled over, suddenly in extreme pain. He felt as if his body was coming apart at the seams. He looked back at Eri, who was still clutching to his back. The horn on her head had grown longer, and was glowing even more. Her quirk was increasing beyond her control. This was bad. If it continued to grow, Izuku would be destroyed. He felt the ground rumble beneath him. Chisaki was awake. He had reformed himself, and was reaching towards him with one of his giant hands. As soon as it touched him, however, the arm exploded, causing a reversal where Katsukame and Chisaki separated, sending them both flying in opposite directions. Uraraka immediately seized her chance and floated towards Chisaki, using her martial arts she learned from Gahead to subdue the crime boss. Izuku fell to his knees. Eri's power was growing, and he could feel himself growing weaker by the second. He had to find a way to shut off her quirk, but he could barely move from the sheer weight of the power coursing through his body. Eri felt her heart pound, crying in fear. She had to stop. She was going to kill him. She had to. Suddenly, the power that was coursing through her suddenly stopped, causing her to collapse in a heap atop Midoriya, who caught her just in time. Ajiri, Ryukyu, Green Arrow, and Eraserhead had finally made their way above ground, and Aizawa had used his quirk just in time to stop Eri before it was too late. Eri was safe. Chisaki was defeated. They had won. The rest of the raid went off without a hitch. Reinforcements were called, and those who were injured were quickly taken to the hospital. Red Riot, Rocklock, Lemillion, and several police were carried away on stretchers, sustaining minor to moderate injuries that would recover with time and treatment. Green Arrow, Arsenal, Speedy, Suneater, Fatgum, and the remaining heroes and police worked to clear out and arrest the rest of the Hasaikai. Eri had gained a fever and passed out. She was quickly rushed to the hospital with the others. It was Sir Night-Eye that had taken the worst injury. He was in critical condition, and if it wasn't for the fact the spiked pillar that pierced him through the back had stopped the blood loss, he would have bled out long before the ambulances arrived. Chisaki was strapped to a stretcher and taken into police custody. He was scheduled to be transported to Tartarus within the hour. His hands were restrained to prevent him from using his quirk, but the mob boss seemed listless and didn't put up a fight. Still, the heroes were not going to underestimate him. As the police were driving, however, they noticed a large semi-truck pull up in front of them. They turned on their sirens to signal them to move, but the truck didn't budge. Suddenly, the back doors opened, revealing three individuals: a man in a red shirt and black vest, sporting a white mask and top hat, a man with purple patchwork skin, and lastly, "Tamura Shigaraki!" shouted one of the officers. The patchwork villain known as Dabi used his fire to blast the police car before him. The blast was interrupted, however, when Snatch, the sand hero that was escorting them, threw up a wall of sand to protect them. Shigaraki had leapt from the truck towards the police vehicle. Snatch tried to throw up another protective wall, but Mr. Compress had rolled one of his compression orbs under the car, and upon releasing it, caused the car to ram into a large boulder that was contained in the orb. Shigaraki hopped from that car to the other one, breaking the glass and causing the driver to crash the car. This caused the truck that was carrying Chisaki to swerve to miss hitting the police car, overturning it in the process. With the convoy stopped, Dabi and Mr. Compress subdued Snatch in a compression ball. Shigaraki approached Chisaki, who was still strapped to the stretcher and immobilized. He stared despondent at Shigaraki as he approached. "Did you come to kill me?" he said. "No," said Shigaraki. "That's too easy. No, I thought of what you would hate the most." Shigaraki removed the hand on his face that served as his mask. "Do you know what I can't stand about you? You're too full of yourself. You think you're better than everyone just because you can't handle a few germs." Chisaki felt a sharp pain course through his arm. He looked down to see that Mr. Compress had used one of his compression orbs to sever his arm at the elbow. "An eye for an eye, an arm for an arm," he said, brandishing his robotic arm while he made the orb disappear. Chisaki looked in horror as Shigaraki pulled the small wooden container from the safety box from the truck. "Is this the finished product?" he asked, inspecting the contents inside. "Give it back," said Chisaki. "No," said Chisaki, pocketing the box. "You know something, Overhaul. A person who wants to rid the world of quirks shouldn't rely so much on his own." He reached down and placed his hand on Chisaki's non-severed forearm. He felt a rush of pain as the skin began to crack and die, withering away. In an instant, Shigaraki cut off his other arm at the elbow, stopping the decay. "Sorry about that, but if I hadn't cut it off, your body would have turned to dust. But isn't it funny? All this time you were trying to rid the world of quirks. Now you are nothing but a powerless, quirkless child yourself. Hoisted by your own petard, so to speak. And now the fruits of your labor are mine, and you have nothing." Chisaki gasped in horror, the realization dawning on him. His hands were gone, which meant that his quirk was now gone. Everything he had worked for was undone. Everything he had strived for was for naught. And worst of all, he swore to revive the boss after his work was complete, and now he could not. The boss was going to die. The man who saved him, took him in and raised him, was going to die because of him. Shigaraki walked away, leaving the horrified and shattered Chisaki to wallow in his thoughts. He retrieved the box from his pocket, looking at the 4 remaining bullets inside them. "Our benefactor will be very pleased," he said. "Indeed I am." Shigaraki turned to the voice behind him. A shiny limo had just pulled up beside them, and a woman in a business suit had opened the rear door, and a tall, bald man with a muscular physique and expensive suit stepped out. He was fidgeting with the glowing green ring on his finger as he approached the villains. "We held up our end of the bargain, Luthor," said Shigaraki. "Now it's your turn." "Yes, you've done well, Shigaraki," said Lex Luthor, handling the box and placing it in his suit coat. "Don't worry, I'm a man of my word. Phase 1 is complete. Soon you will get your revenge. But first, there's much work to do." Izuku had finally reached the hospital himself. After being inspected by the doctor, he was found to have sustained no injuries at all. This wasn't surprising to Izuku, considering Eri had used her quirk on him, but that wasn't what was on his mind at the moment. He had to find Eri, Lemillion and his classmates, and most of all, he had to see how Sir Nightai was doing. From what the EMT had said before they arrived, he was in critical condition and was not expected to survive. "If you're looking for the others, you'll need to come with me," said a voice from behind him. He turned to see Aizawa standing in the doorway to the examination room the doctor had just left Izuku in. "Mr. Aizawa," Izuku said. "Are you all right? What about your injuries?" "I had 10 stitches," Aizawa said nonchalantly. "This way." As they walked, he filled Izuku in on the status of the other heroes. Kirishima had broken bones and lacerations, but nothing too serious. Fatgum had a few broken bones, Amajiki had a crack in his cheekbone and eye socket, but they were doing okay. As they walked past his room, Izuku noticed that Amajiki wasn't alone. Sitting in a chair at his was Speedy, a bouquet of flowers laying at the foot of his bed as they talked. Izuku smiled to himself as they continued to walk. "What about Eri?" Izuku asked. "Still unconscious and feverish," Aizawa replied. "We've had to keep her quarantined." "Quarantined?" Izuku asked. "You mean I can't see her?" "It's because she can't control her quirk," Aizawa explained. "If she should lose control again, I'm the only one who can stop her. The only reason you were able to withstand her quirk is because you continuously destroyed your body in the process." Aizawa sighed. "Training her to use her quirk is going to be difficult," he said, more to himself. "We can't rely on her quirk to fix what's been done. Just gotta accept it." Izuku didn't quite know what he meant by that, but before he could ask, they walked through the double doors at the end of the hallway. "Good, you've arrived," Aizawa said. Izuku stepped through the doors behind Aizawa to see Almight, Recovery Girl, Oliver, Black Canary, and Night Eye's sidekicks standing in the lobby. "Almight? Recovery Girl?" Izuku said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "I called them," said Bubble Girl. "Sir Night Eye is—" She began to break down into tears. "He's not expected to live long," said Recovery Girl. "It's honestly a miracle that he lived this long. Not even my healing can help him now." All Might stood before his old sidekick, beholding the grisly sight before him. Tubes and wires of all kinds were coming out of the hole in his stomach as he struggled to breathe. It was a sight that All Might was all too familiar with, and it reminded him of his first fight with All for One that had placed him in his current physical condition. It pained his heart to see his friend and comrade this way. "Night Eye," All Might said, waking him. Night Eye slowly opened his eyes, looking at All Might. "So," he said weakly, "you finally feel like seeing me, but on my deathbed?" "I'm sorry," said All Might. "I've no excuse for the way I treated you. I wish things had been different." "Sir Night Eye," said Izuku, running into the room from behind All Might. "You have to live. I can contact the Justice League. There has to be something we can do." "It's too late, Midoriya," said Night Eye, who then turned to All Might. "I don't resent you, All Might. I know that it is in your nature to be a hero. I shouldn't have tried to force you to retire. It's your nature to fight for what is right. But you need to fight too," said All Might. "If I am to atone for how I let you down." "There's nothing to atone for," said Night Eye. "I wanted to change the future where you were killed, but no matter what I tried, I wasn't able to change it." He turned to face Izuku. "But you showed me today, Midoriya. You showed me that the future is not as set in stone as I once thought. A strong will, with an unshakable determination, can overcome any obstacle." The door behind them burst open suddenly, startling Izuku and All Might. Togata came limping through the door as fast as he could while the nurse tried to stop him. "Sir!" he cried upon reaching his bed. "Please, you can't die. You can't. I still have so much to learn from you. Please." Tears fell freely from his face as he trembled before his mentor. "Mirio," said Night Eye. "I should have been a better mentor to you. I only wish I could have saved you before you lost your quirk." "Don't say that," said Togata. "I owe everything to you. It was because of your teaching that I was able to get strong. I would be nothing without you. Please don't leave me." Nai slowly lifted his hand towards Mirio, placing it on his cheek. Mirio saw his mentor's irises change to a deep purple color, the same color it did when he was using his quirk. "I've seen your future, Mirio," he said. "You will become the finest hero this world has ever seen." His hand fell to his side as his strength left him. "This is a future that should not change." He gave a rattled breath before a smile returned to his face. Remember to smile. A world without humor will not have a bright future." The heart monitor attached to Engtai began to let out a steady tone. Almight could no longer hold back his own tears. His sidekick, his partner, his best friend, was gone. Hours had passed since Naitai's passing. Despite there appearing to be nothing physically wrong with Izuku, the doctors wanted to keep him overnight for observation, just in case. Izuku and Mirio had returned to their respective rooms to rest, but it proved to be a nearly impossible endeavor. Finally, after what seemed like forever, Izuku was able to drift into a restless sleep. "Hey nerd, time to get up." Izuku's eyes shot open to see his old friend Katsuki Bakugo standing in the doorway of his hospital room. "Kaken?" Izuku said, sitting up in surprise. "What's going on? What are you doing here?" "Get up," he said again. "There's some people who want to talk to you." Without another word, he turned on his heel and walked out the door. Izuku got up, confused and cautious. As he approached the door, the room around him seemed to change. After he walked through, the hospital had disappeared, and instead he found himself in a large circular room. There were 9 people sitting in high-backed chairs surrounding him. In the center chair directly in front of him was a strange, humanoid man with green skin and white hair, with 3 circles glowing on his forehead connected with lines. Next to him was a thin, sickly-looking man with long silver hair, wearing a simple long-sleeved shirt and pants. On the other side of the green man was a woman with black hair, partly tied in a bun with the rest flowing freely. The rest of the inhabitants of the room and the chairs around him were shrouded in shadow, with glowing eyes that seemed to stare into Izuku's soul. Kaken stood next to Izuku, who looked at him nervously. Kaken simply nodded, indicating him to move forward. Izuku nervously approached the center of the circle, and the green man greeted him with a warm smile. "Welcome, Izuku Midoriya," he said. "We've been expecting you. It's finally good to meet you in person." Who are you?" Izuku asked. "My name is Quirkless," said the man. "You may know me by my other name, Brainiac." Izuku's eyes widened in shock. "It's you," he said. "Then does that mean—" "Yes," said the woman. "One for all has passed to you." "But how?" said Izuku at a loss. "Your mentor," said Quirkless. "Bruce?" asked Izuku. "He had taken a strand of Almight's hair," said the man with the silver hair. "After doing so, he had explained to Tashinori that he had crafted it into an injectable serum, to be used as a contingency." "A contingency for what?" asked Izuku. "All for One may be contained, but he is not defeated," said Quirkless. "Brainiac still guides him, even in prison. Bruce knows this, as he knows the importance of One for All." "I don't understand," said Izuku. "You were All Might's chosen successor," said the woman. "When the serum was injected into you, One for All passed on to you. Now you are the next holder of this power." Izuku could hardly believe it. His mind was filled with mixed emotions. Part of him felt betrayed by Bruce for forcing this power onto him, but another part of him felt relieved, as it undoubtedly saved his life, and what caused him to succeed in his battle against Overhaul. He knew that Bruce had contingencies for nearly everything, and he obviously wanted to make sure that Izuku would be safe, and somehow knew that he would need this power eventually. "But we sense that you are hesitant to take this power," the silver-haired man said. Izuku couldn't lie, he was apprehensive of taking this power. Though he had come to terms with it, he had a hard time accepting Kaken's quirk being forced onto him by All for One. He no longer wanted power to prove he was strong, because he wanted to show the world that he was strong without powers. But now, it was more than that. He learned that it wasn't the powers or lack thereof that made a hero, but the will to do what was necessary, to make the sacrifices, even the ultimate one, to save those in need. But there was something more to it than that. "Something is stopping you from fully obtaining this power," said Quirkless. "You feel that there is someone else more deserving of it than you." Izuku nodded. It was true, there was one other he felt was more deserving of this power than he was. Togata had lost everything in his battle with Overhaul, his quirk, his future as a hero, and even his mentor, and had never once faltered in his desire to save Eri. He truly was the embodiment of All Might, the very same hero that he wanted to be like at one point. As he continued his train of thought, His mind flashed back to the prophecy Night Eye gave before he died. You will be the finest hero this world has ever seen. You know the importance of one for all, said the silver-haired man. You know it is the destiny of the heir of the House of Dogs to destroy Brainiac, and put an end to the suffering he has caused. Yes, Izuku said. You know that this power is not taken or given lightly, said the woman. Yes, Izuku repeated. Then you know, Izuku Midoriya, what you must do, said Quirkless. But no matter your choice, you are still a vessel of one for all, and as such, you will always hold a connection to it, and to us. I understand, said Izuku. Then go forth, Izuku Midoriya, said Quirkless. Follow your chosen path, and do not falter. And remember. He smiled knowingly at Izuku as the room around him began to fade. Anyone can be a hero. Izuku awoke with a start. After a moment of taking in his surroundings, he realized that he was back in his hospital room. He leaned back in his bed, pondering what had just transpired. After what felt like an eternity, Izuku came to a decision. He knew what he had to do. Izuku quietly crept out of bed, retrieving his utility belt and exiting his room. He deftly dodged the night nurses and doctors that were making their rounds as he made his way down the hallway. Thanks to his training with Batman, he was able to avoid being seen rather easily. Finally, after a few minutes, he made it to his destination, Togata's room. He slowly and quietly opened the door and stepped in. Togata was fast asleep. He heard from the nurses that the death of his mentor had shaken him to his core, so much that he had to be sedated in order to assist him with sleeping so he could heal. Izuku silently crept over, pausing for a moment as he looked at the poor battered teenager before him. His heart ached for his loss, as he knew both how it felt to lose someone who meant a lot to you, as well as to feel powerless to stop it. He took a deep breath. It was now or never. He reached into his utility belt and drew a small knife. He sliced a small cut at the tip of his finger, just enough to draw blood. He then moved over to Togata and carefully removed one of his bandages on his arm, exposing one of the many cuts and lacerations that riddled his body. Carefully, placed his bloodied finger against the open wound, allowing his blood to seep into the gash. Upon doing so, he felt strange, as if a life force was being pulled from his body. As quickly as it came, it had gone, leaving him with an eerie feeling of emptiness. But despite this, he couldn't help but also feel a sense of relief passing over him. Sir Night Eye's vision will come true, Izuku thought. You will be the finest hero this world has ever seen. Izuku then replaced the bandage, and exited the room. An old man walked the empty halls of the University Hospital mortuary. He leaned on a cane and carried a duffel bag with him, his breathing slightly labored as he walked. It was after hours, so the staff had gone home for the night. That was good. He didn't want to be disturbed. He approached the door that led to cold storage, where they held the cadavers before transporting them to be cremated. He put down the duffel bag and with a wave of his hand, the door unlocked and opened, allowing him to step through. The old man looked through the many cold storage lockers that lined the wall before him, finally finding the one he was looking for. Dropping the duffel bag, he waved his hand again, and the locker slid open on its own, drawing out a table with a body bag resting on it. He unzipped the body bag and opened it, revealing the lifeless corpse of Sir Night Eye. "Hello, old friend," said the man. "I'm sorry we had to meet again like this." He sighed as he looked over his friend's peaceful face. "You have been through so much, a part of me wants to let you rest, to leave you to your reward in the afterlife." However, he opened the duffel bag and retrieved a golden helmet. "Fate has other plans for you. One for All has successfully passed on." Izuku and Togata were sitting across from John Johns in the watchtower. Behind them stood Almight and Batman. The former had a look of complete shock on his face, while the latter was as stoic as ever. Izuku had awoken that morning and immediately made his way to Togata's room. Upon arriving there, the upperclassman had informed him that had awoken feeling strange that morning, and when he got up to brush his teeth, he had accidentally snapped his toothbrush in half, causing the top half of the toothbrush to shoot across the room and shatter the glass in his window. Izuku immediately contacted Bruce and All Might, who had arranged for Togata and Izuku to be transported to the watchtower. After explaining the situation to them both, they took the teenagers to John, who began using his psychic abilities to investigate the situation further. "So, that means young Midoriya has passed it on to young Togata here?" asked Almight. "That is correct," said John. "What about Kaken?" asked Izuku. "Katsuki Bakugo's presence has remained behind, along with his quirk," John said. "How?" asked Almight. "I am uncertain about that," said John. "Perhaps it is because of the conditioning I placed upon Izuku's mind that prevented the transference of the exabytes. Or perhaps it is simply that your friend did not want to leave you." John gave Izuku a kind smile as Izuku pondered his words. "But I don't understand," Togata said, getting Izuku's attention. "Why would you do this? Why would you give up so much power? A chance to be All Might's successor?" Izuku pondered for a moment. "Because I wasn't worthy," he said simply. "I think we all know that's not true," said Batman. Izuku chuckled slightly. "Because of what Sir Knight I said," said Izuku. "He said that you were going to be the finest hero the world has ever seen, and this is a future that should not change. Well, I plan on seeing that it doesn't." But Togata began. "Besides," Izuku interrupted, looking up at Bruce, "I already have a legacy to live up to." He looked back at Togata, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Carrying on All Might's legacy, as well as Night Eyes, is yours to do." Togata couldn't help but smile as he wiped a tear from his eye. "But everyone thinks that I lost my quirk. How am I going to explain all this?" he asked. "Well, the quirk erasing cartridges were lost en route to police headquarters," said Batman. "Most likely taken by the League of Villains, considering what happened to Chisaki. We still don't know a lot about them, and we can conceivably say that this is a side effect of the drug. In the meantime, you will need some time to adjust to these powers," said All Might. "I have arranged to have you continue the semester here at the Watchtower." "Seriously?" asked Togata, beaming with excitement. "But who's going to teach me?" "I will be here every few days to help show you the ropes of this quirk," said All Might. "Also, several heroes here have volunteered to help you along the way." "I'll be here as well," said Izuku. "All Might and Batman convinced the school to allow me to continue my work studies here with the Justice League. I was the one who gave you this quirk, and I will see it through until you master it." "Thank you, Midoriya," said Togata, embracing Izuku. He was a little taken aback by this forward show of affection, but let it slide as Togata has always been more touchy-feely than the rest of his peers. "Now then, perhaps we should," John began before he was interrupted by the sound of an alarm. He immediately took flight towards the command deck of the watchtower, with the rest of the group following in tow. Once they had all reached the command deck, they saw Superman was already there, with several other superheroes working the various controls. "What's going on?" asked John. "We just got an emergency alert from the Green Lantern Corps," said Superman. "We're trying to patch it through now." "Green Lantern Watchtower, Green Lantern to what? Our Green Lantern, this is the Watchtower," said Superman into the con. "Please boost your signal and repeat. This is John Stewart of the Green Lantern Corps, trying to contact the Watchtower." A gruff voice through the communications con came through. "John, this is Superman, we read you loud and clear," said Superman into the con. "What is happening?" "We have an Omega-level emergency," said John Stewart. "The line has been broken. They are heading for Earth space now." "Who?" said John. "Repeat, who is coming?" The response became jumbled, and John tried to boost the signal. "Repeat, Green Lantern," he said. "Who is coming?" Apocalypse. Chapter 69, Invasion of the Gods. John Stewart was a soldier. Born to the crime-riddled streets of Detroit, Michigan, from an early age fighting was all he had ever known. His mother worked hard to support him and his sister, and without a father to protect them, he put it upon himself to take up that burden. But the violence didn't stop. The fighting never stopped. He worked hard day in and day out to keep his family safe from the gangs and murderers that plagued their streets. Even those who he would have turned to for help, who swore to protect innocents like them, were either unwilling or unable to help them in their time of need. This hardship took its toll on the poor child, but it did instill in him one ideal that would forever embed itself into his heart: justice. To stand for those who could not stand for themselves. To fight for those who were powerless. To become the shield and beacon of light for those whose darkness threatened to overtake them. He would become that shield, that beacon. It led him to fight back against the tide of corruption in his neighborhood, and led him to fight for his country in the United States Marine Corps, where he quickly became a dangerous and feared marksman among his enemies. But that all came to a change after he was discharged for standing up against a superior officer for what he believed in during the anarchy crisis in Gotham City. This injustice did not sit well with the young soldier, but he was forced to swallow the bitter pill as it boiled his blood. He tried to find other ways to improve the world around him through studying architecture and design. For a time he was willing to put the fighting behind him and lead a life of peace. But peace is a luxury a soldier can ill afford, and the universe had other plans for him. Chosen by the OA to bear the Lantern's ring was more than he could have ever wanted. A power that he did not take lightly, he used this tool and his new abilities well, quickly becoming a revered and respected White Knight among the Lantern Corps. But now, the Corps was all but decimated, and the Guardians destroyed. And OA was burning from hellfire. And standing before him, grasping his throat tightly as he struggled in vain to free himself, was a monster more fearsome than even the most devilish of Satan's armies, the god of darkness, the demon himself. Darkseid. You have fought well, Green Lantern, Darkseid said, his grip tightening. But your masters are destroyed, and your armies vanquished. But I am not without mercy. You must only speak my name and bow to me, and I will grant you a warrior's death. John gasped for air as Darkseid's grip was loosened, dropping him to the floor. He looked at his ring, which was cracked and broken on his finger. It would no longer be able to protect him, to fight for him. He was simply a man now, facing the might of a god. But he was a soldier. If he was going to die, it would be on his feet. He struggled to his feet, staring defiantly into the eyes of his oppressor. In brightest day and blackest night, he choked, his voice straining after being strangled. No evil shall escape my sight. John was thrown sideways as Darkseid's clenched fist collided with his face, sending him crashing into the rubble beside them. He knew this attack was not at full power, otherwise he would be dead. Darkseid was toying with him. Once again, he struggled to his feet, spitting blood onto the floor as he coughed violently. He could feel that his lung had collapsed, and he had several broken ribs. For those who worship evil's might, he said, struggling as he began to black out. Beware my power, Green Lantern's light! Darkseid simply laughed as John continued to stand obstinate against him. Very well, warrior, he said. If you simply complied, your death would have been quick and painless. But now, I have something else planned for you. He reached out and grabbed John by the throat once again, holding a remote-like device, pressing the button on the top of it. There was a loud explosion beside them as a tear formed in the fabric of space and time, opening like a window. John looked in horror as he saw the planet on the other side of that window. Earth. For too long your masters have defied me, said Darkseid, keeping me from taking what is rightfully mine. The anti-life equation is on your homeworld. I am certain of it. And now, as punishment for your impudence, you will watch helplessly as I level your home. Once I find what I am looking for, only then will I bring your pitiful planet to its final destiny. He dropped John to the floor, who gagged and coughed as Darkseid simply walked past him towards the boom tube before them. He had to contact the Justice League. He had to warn them of what was coming. He began to crawl towards his broken ring. Upon reaching it, he saw the cloaked figure of Darkseid's aide and chief of torture, Dacid, stood over him. He simply bent down and handed the ring to John. Call your comrades, Green Lantern, Dacid said, grinning maliciously. Warn them of our coming, but it will do you no good. Nothing can stop the great Darkseid. Your planet is doomed. Dacid stood and followed his master towards the portal. Several more boom tubes opened up around the planet as hordes of parademons piled out of them like a swarm of locusts. Green Lantern to Watchtower, he croaked into the broken ring. He wasn't sure if his signal was getting out, but he had to try. Green Lantern to Watchtower. Green Lantern, this the W. Tower. Please boo, ignore and repeat. The ring spoke as a broken communication came through. This is John Stewart of the Green Lantern Corps, trying to contact the Watchtower. He shouted into the ring. John, this is Superman, we read you loud and clear, the ring replied. What is happening? We have an Omega-level emergency, said John. The line has been broken. They are heading for Earth space now. Who? Who is coming? Apocalypse, said John, before finally succumbing to his injuries and fading into unconsciousness. The Watchtower was in utter pandemonium as an alarm blasted through the halls. Heroes and technicians were scrambling to their stations as ships left the hangar bay. Izuku, Almight, and Togata struggled to keep up with Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, and Martian Manhunter as they made their way out of the medical bay. What's going on? Said Izuku. We don't have a lot of time, said Superman. They'll likely be here any second. We need to scramble for support, said Batman. Get the word out to all agencies across the globe. It's all hands on deck. John, get these kids out of here and somewhere safe. Batman, what's happening? Izuku said. To the average layman, Batman looked as stoic as ever. But he knew Bruce on a better level than most people. The look in his eyes conveyed a concern that he had never seen before, and it unnerved the young hero in training. We don't have time to explain, said Batman. Go with John Hill. No way, said Izuku. If something's going down, we want to help. Out of the question, said Batman immediately. It's too dangerous. Too dangerous? Said Izuku incredulously. After all that he had been through with the hero killer, the League of Villains, All for One, the Joker, and most recently, the Hasaikai, did Bruce not have faith in him by now? Batman, we can help, just... No! Batman snapped, turning to the Martian Manhunter. John, get them out of here. It's too late for that, Batman, came a voice from their comlinks, one that Izuku didn't recognize. You'd better get up to the command deck. Right now. Izuku and Togata expressed a concerned look at each other as they followed the heroes to the command deck. Once there, they saw a man standing at one of the computer consoles, clad completely in what looked like a suit made of metal, with a large flowing red cape and Superman's insignia on his chest. Izuku immediately recognized him as John Henry Irons' codename, Steel, one of the heroes that took Superman's place after he was presumed dead. What's going on? Said Batman once they reached the command deck. Look for yourself, said Steel, pressing a few buttons. Immediately the blast shields covering the viewports of the command deck parted, and the posse of heroes were met with a sight that took their collective breath away. Several holes in space seemed to have opened up around them, and there were thousands, even millions of creatures spilling out of each of them. This horde of monsters was unlike anything Izuku had ever seen. It was as if the very heavens were invoking a plague of locusts upon them. Can we get to the surface? Asked Superman. Our transporter is experiencing interference, said Steel. Something seems to be blocking transmission, and the parademons are moving to intercept our ships. Why didn't they just use the boom tubes to transport directly to the planet? Asked Wonder Woman. Probably to isolate us from the planet, said Batman. Can we get communications out? Still working on that, said Steel. Should only be a few minutes. We don't have a few minutes, said Superman. I'll buy you some time. In the blink of an eye, Superman was already out of the room, heading towards the docking bay. A few seconds later, they saw a small blue and red figure appearing out in space, which began to engage the creatures while in the vacuum itself. Togata and Izuku watched the sight in amazement. Although Izuku followed heroes all his life, this was the first time he had ever seen Superman in combat in person, and it was a fascinating sight to see. The teleporter is online, said Steel, shaking them out of their thoughts. Send us down, now, said Batman. Before Izuku could protest, a bright glow surrounded them as the watchtower disappeared, replaced with grass and trees. He looked about, and saw that they were back on the UA campus, with All Might, Togata, and Batman standing next to him. Batman turned and began walking away, placing his finger to his ear and speaking into his comm link. "Batman to Watchtower," he said into his comm. "I'm heading to the warehouse and engage the enemy once I am airborne." "No, wait," said Izuku. "We can help." "Out of the question," said Batman immediately, turning to Izuku. "You have no idea what you're up against." "Then enlighten us," said Togata. "What's happening? What are those creatures, and what's Apocalypse?" Batman paused. Every second they stood here may be a second too late to save them, but he knew how stubborn Izuku and his friend could be. And if he didn't let them in on what was happening, they would probably do something that would get them killed. He had to level with them, but he had to do it fast. "Apocalypse is a planet beyond our solar system," said Batman. "Imagine the worst hell and your worst fears in the deepest, darkest of your nightmares. It is a place where darkness and evil reign supreme, unchecked and unchallenged. The air is thick with smoke and the rotting stench of death and decay, and the only sound is that of the misery and suffering of its people. The one who rules over them is the worst of tyrants this universe has ever seen, the dark new god Darkseid. Those creatures," he gestured to the sky above them, "are parademons, his foot soldiers. They are here to wipe the planet clean of all life, until the planet becomes like that of Apocalypse." Izuku felt his heart drop into his feet. It was common knowledge that there was other life in the universe, ever since they discovered the Martian race, and he assumed that just as there are peaceful and benevolent creatures, there must also be hostile ones as well. But he never expected something as horrifying as this. He exchanged looks with Togata, who looked just as stunned. "But what is he here for?" Togata asked. "The anti-life equation," said Batman. "Those who know it will have the power to dominate the minds of all sentient creatures in the universe, eliminating choice and free will. With it, he will have ultimate power in the universe, and will be unstoppable. He believes that it's here, and will stop at nothing to obtain it." He turned once again and began walking away. "You two are in over your heads. You can't help this time." "Batman," said Izuku, causing his mentor to stop once again. "We may not be able to help fight Darkseid, but we can't just sit here and do nothing. Please, there has to be something we can do." Batman considered the two young heroes for a moment. "All right," he said. "You can help us here." "How?" asked Togata. "Get in touch with the Arrow," Batman explained. "Have him rally every hero agency he can. There are going to be casualties. Lots of casualties. Rally your classmates. Those with hero licenses will need to help mitigate any loss of life that we can. We can't rule out the possibility that the League of Villains and other criminals will capitalize on the chaos, and we can't let that happen. For any students who are not licensed, have them stay on the school grounds. They should be safe here. But you are not to engage any parademons unless you have no other choice." He crouched down, coming face to face with the two boys. "I warn you," he said. "These creatures are unlike anything you have ever faced. Unlike even the Nomu. They're worse. Much worse. If you do engage them, do not hesitate, and show no mercy. Put them down." "You mean kill them?" Izuku said, shocked. He had never heard his mentor speak about taking a life before. "These are monsters, Midoriya," said Batman. "They are mindless killing machines who will stop at nothing to destroy everything in their wake. So yes, you must kill them. Do you understand?" Izuku nodded. Batman then turned to All Might. "Keep them safe, Toshinori," he said. "Gather the teachers. Make sure they know what's happening." "You have my word," said All Might. Batman then tossed a set of keys to All Might, who looked at them curiously. "I made some modifications to your car," said Batman. "In an emergency, press the red button on the key fob." "You modified Hercules?" said All Might, horrified. "Nothing noticeable," said Batman. "Just trust me. Now go!" The three heroes nodded and began to head into the school grounds. Izuku looked back at his mentor and saw him press a few buttons on his wrist computer before running down the path. A few seconds later, the batwing flew overhead and Batman grappled to it, and flew away. Izuku was scared. More scared than he had ever been in his life. This was more than just a villain attack. They were repelling a full-fledged alien invasion. He had no idea what he should do, but he knew he had to get to his friends, first and foremost, and make sure they were safe. "Why are we back here, Luthor?" said Shigaraki impatiently. "What is going on?" Shigaraki and the League members were standing once again in Luthor's office, the one they were transported to during his master's battle with Almight. Luthor ignored him, only staring out the large window behind his desk. After a few minutes, Shigaraki heard the sound of an explosion and joined Luthor at the window. He was shocked to see a swarm of creatures he had never seen before enter the Earth's atmosphere. They looked similar to his Nomu, but heavily armored and carrying weapons. "It's begun," said Luthor, smiling and checking his watch. "And right on time. Your master will be pleased." "What is going on, Luthor?" said Dabi. "What are those things?" "Patience, Dabi," said Luthor. "All in good time. This is only the first stage of the plan. With the heroes preoccupied by the invasion, we will use this opportunity to our advantage. But first, we need to prepare your leader," he added, turning to Shigaraki. "Prepare me?" asked Shigaraki. "Prepare me for what?" "Are we ready, Doctor?" said Luthor, looking past Shigaraki, towards the door of his office. Shigaraki and the League turned to see a bald, mustached man with large, goggle-like glasses entering the room. Behind him was what looked to be a large albino gorilla with an enlarged head, as well as a slender woman in a black dress with long, purple hair. "Everything is ready, Luthor," said the mustached man. "The question is he ready?" He pointed to Shigaraki. "He's ready," said Luthor. "Now that the first stage is complete, we will now let the transformation begin." "Transformation?" asked Shigaraki. "You're going to fulfill your destiny," said Luthor, placing a hand on Shigaraki's shoulder. "You're going to take your master's place, and do what you were born to do, destroy All Might and any and all those who oppose you." Shigaraki was led down the stairs into what looked to be a state-of-the-art laboratory. Inside it were several Noma and other creatures that he did not recognize. In the middle of the room was a large surgical bed, and the gorilla and the mustached doctor began to go to work. "This process will be grueling," said the gorilla. "You may not survive it." "He'll survive, Humanite," said Luthor. "Of that I have no doubt." Shigaraki stared at the table before him, his breathing becoming shallow. The time had finally come. He was going to inherit his master's power. He was going to become the master. It was time to face his destiny. Chapter 70, Armageddon. Deep within the walls of the villain prison, Tartarus housed only the worst of the worst. It was aptly named, the prison that held the titans who were defeated in the War of the Gods, holding the worst that humanity had to offer, those who through their great power would topple and change the very nature of existence. Who would by their very presence strike fear into the hearts of all those who were unfortunate enough to cross their paths. In the very heart of the prison sat a decrepit man in a wheelchair. His face had horrible scars which left him completely blind, with only his mouth, which was twisted up into a wicked smile, remained of the features he once had. He was bound and chained to the chair, with video cameras aligning his cell. Armed with heavy repeating rifles which were poised to fire at any moment the man dared to activate his quirk or move in any threatening way possible. It was close to feeding time, but there had been a great commotion within the prison. He doubted that it would be on time today. Not that it mattered to him. He was kept in the dark about the world outside the prison, but he had a pretty good idea as to what was going on right now. If all was going according to plan, he would soon be free of these shackles. The commotion began to grow louder as time passed on. He could hear gunfire, shouting, and explosions. Though he was blind, he knew that his captors would still be monitoring him, so he dared not activate one of his thermal vision. He had to be patient. As the minutes continued to crawl, the explosions grew louder, and the ground began to shake beneath him. His smile grew as the trembling grew larger. He knew the sound that was fast approaching him all too well. The sound of the stride of giant footsteps, tearing through the various walls and obstacles, seeking his location. The sound of shouting, guns, and fighting was close now. It was right outside his cell. He could hear the guards being subdued and killed, the cells around him being smashed open. He heard the sound of the cameras around him short-circuiting, and he knew it was time. Activating his quirk, he could see the gigantic thermal form of one of his most loyal followers, accompanied by 2 more signatures that he recognized instantly. "Gigantomachia," said All for One. "Tala Luthor. I was expecting you." "I'm sure you were," said Luthor. "Has the invasion begun?" asked All for One. "It has," said Luthor. "And Tamura?" "Dr. Garaki is preparing him for the transformation now," Luthor replied. "The time has finally arrived." "Good, good," All for One said. His smile grew as Tala used her magic to unshackle him. Soon, he would be free of this prison, he would be reunited with his student and successor, and the heroes would be too busy fighting the hordes of Apocalypse to stop him. Everything was going according to plan. Izuku and Togata ran as fast as they could through the UA High campus courtyard. They had to get to the teachers to warn them of what was happening. Hopefully, the League was able to get their message to them, but regardless, it would be clear in a few moments as to what was quickly approaching. A crowd of students began to form outside the school, staring in awe and shock upwards as the skies began to grow darker as the swarms of parademons entered their atmosphere. They would be upon them in a matter of minutes. They hoped that the heroes would have enough time to mobilize before it was too late. "Deku!" Izuku turned to see Uraraka and his classmates fighting their way through the crowd, trying to get to them. "What's happening?" she said once they finally reached each other. "What are those things?" shouted Mineta, pointing to the sky. "Are they Nomu?" asked Yakuza. "They're parademons," said Izuku. "It's an invasion." "Invasion?" shouted his classmates. "There's no time to explain," said Izuku. "We have to." He was cut off at the sound of an intercom coming online. "Students and faculty," came the voice of Aizawa. It sounded tense and sharp, a far cry from his regular lazy voice. "We are under attack. Repeat, we are under attack. Faculty and students with a current provisional license, gather in the courtyard. The other students, please make your way to the auditorium. Your safety is of paramount importance, so do not dawdle. Repeat, students make your way to the auditorium, and faculty and provisional heroes gather in the courtyard." "I need to find Tamaki and Nijire," said Togata, looking through the crowd. "Where's Eri?" "She's safe, she's with Mr. Aizawa," said Kirishima. "He thought it was best to stay close to her in case he needed to use his quirk if she goes out of control again." "Good," said Togata, relieved. "Togata, we need to stick together. You need to be careful about you-know-what," said Izuku slowly, trying not to reveal about One for All. "We're in this together, and I'm not going to leave your side." "I know," said Togata, placing his hand on his friend's shoulder. "Once I find my classmates, I'll meet you in the courtyard. In the meantime, get your class together. They need their leader." Izuku paused before nodding. He turned to his classmates, who all stared at him expectantly. He never saw himself as much of a leader, but he supposed it would be pointless to try and convince himself that he was otherwise. The class looked to him for guidance more than he cared to admit. It was time to swallow his fear and embrace that fact. "All right, you heard Aizawa," said Izuku. "Let's head to the courtyard, we have work to do." Enji Todoroki stared at the sky in shocked disbelief. He has only had a short tenure as the #1 hero in Japan, a spot for which he had been striving all his life to achieve, but instead of earning it for himself, it was handed to him on a silver platter when Almight retired. This was both humiliating and vexing to the pro-hero. Earning the title by default rather than through his own merits was the last thing he wanted. But at the same time, he couldn't help but notice that once he had achieved his goal, his life had suddenly felt empty. For so long, the desire to surpass Almight, to be the best, had consumed his entire life. It was everything to him. And now that he finally had it, rather than relishing in the triumph he dreamed about for so long, he was left instead with this feeling of melancholy. He had begun to notice things around him, things he had never really paid attention to until now. Namely, he started to notice his family. His daughter Fuyumi often talked to him, but she was the only one. His older son Natsuo usually avoided him completely, which he had simply ignored in the past in favor of his goals. But now, it seemed to be glaring upon him, like a light that was impossible to ignore. What's more, he began to see Shoto for the first time. For 16 years, Enji had seen him as his greatest achievement, his masterpiece, the culmination of all his hard work, the lineage of two great quirk holders merging into an unstoppable warrior. But now all he could see was a 16-year-old boy. A boy who he knew next to nothing about. What's more, he was seeing for the first time how Shoto truly felt about him. At first, he simply attributed his son's anger and cold demeanor to a rebellious phase, one that he would grow out of once he realized his destiny. But now, it was clear that the boy wasn't simply rebellious. It went deeper than that. He hated his father. He had come to watch him during his retake of the hero certification exam. Normally, he would have been rather annoyed at the fact that it had taken him 2 attempts to get his license, a weakness that he would squish out of him with more training. But now, it was as if he was looking at someone completely different, someone that was a total stranger to him. He saw a young boy who was learning, who was finding his own path, who was learning from his mistakes and growing from them. He no longer fought against his heritage, using both quirks with ease, in harmony and balance. A boy who was accepting himself for who he was. What's more, he knew that he couldn't take responsibility for that admirable trait. It wasn't something that he had taught him. It was his friend from school, Midoriya, who was able to help him through this. A boy who he would not have given a second thought to during the sports festival, but had come to see how powerful he was, even before he had a quirk. His feelings about the Batman aside, he couldn't deny that he had trained the boy well. Far better than he could have ever done. In a cruel twist of cosmic irony, during his son's exam, he had actually met his hated enemy face to face for the first time since taking the spot of #1 hero, Almight. He was almost unrecognizable now, a shell of his former, powerful self, but still carried himself with an air of strength and resilience. He felt the animosity between them begin to die as they talked, and he began to share with him what it truly meant to be the #1 hero, and the burden that came along with it. He was the man who the country would look to for guidance, to help them feel safe in their time of need. Time like now. Hawks to Endeavor. Endeavor heard the voice in his comlink. It was the #2 hero, Hawks, a young upstart who served as an annoyance and a hindrance to Endeavor if nothing else, but was a strong hero nonetheless. Endeavor here, what is it? He said. I'm scouting from above, said Hawks. The creatures are entering the stratosphere. They'll be upon us in seconds. I hope you have the troops rallied. We'll be ready, said Endeavor. You'd better be. This is unlike anything I've ever seen before. The comlink went dead. Endeavor sighed as he turned back to the trainees, sidekicks, and heroes he had gathered. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before as well. But they had work to do. The world is under invasion. The students were shocked at the words of their principal, Nizu. Although the existence of extraterrestrials was common knowledge, due to the existence of Superman and the Martian Manhunter, it was still words that they never expected to hear. But the sky was already darkening as the horde grew larger and closer. Izuku had never seen anything like it, but he knew that they were in for a fight unlike anything they've ever seen before. Our first priority is to protect the students of UA, said Nizu. Gather with your homeroom teachers, and we will set up a perimeter around the school. Any invading forces are to be repelled. There's no time for further delay, let's move! Class 1A began to circle around Aizawa. There was a tense air about them, and they worriedly pelted their teacher with questions. What's going on? Asked Sato. What are those things? What's happening? Asked Mineta. They're parademons. The class turned to Izuku, who had a dark look on his face. They're mindless creatures from the planet Apocalypse. He continued. Apocalypse? Uraraka asked. Batman explained it to me, he said. These creatures are beyond what we've faced, even the Noma. They feel no pain and show no mercy. They will not stop until the earth is destroyed. He finally looked up at them. A gaze of extreme severity met their eyes, which shook them to their core. Forget about what you know about being a hero. This is more than just stopping a supervillain. This is about survival. Do not hesitate to put them down. The class was speechless, several of them looking frightened. They knew that Izuku had a rule against killing, inspired by his mentor's philosophy. But if he was telling them to kill these creatures, then they knew that this threat was serious. They were shaken from their thoughts as there was a strange sound on the wind, like a faint buzzing. They looked up at the sky to see that the creatures were descending upon them, the buzzing of their wings getting louder as they approached. "It's begun," said Aizawa. "Get to positions!" The automated defense systems that were installed by Wayne Tech sprang to life as the parademons approached. Railguns appeared from the perimeter wall and began firing upon the invading horde. Parademons began dropping like flies, but the swarm seemed endless. They continued to encircle the school and attempted to enter the courtyard, but a large force field sprang to life and formed around the school, stopping the parademons and causing electric shocks as they touched it. More weapons appeared around the perimeter, firing large red lasers towards the creatures, causing many of them to vaporize into thin air. Others were launching mortars and rockets towards them. The student heroes and faculty formed into groups around the perimeter. Togata had found his friends and was preparing for the assault. "Mirio, you shouldn't be here," said Amajiki. "Your quirk is gone, you'll get hurt," Heido concurred. "Yeah, about that," said Togata sheepishly. "Look, I don't know how to explain it, but my quirk isn't actually gone, it's just changed." "Changed?" asked Heido. "Changed how?" Mirio smiled, wiping his nose with his thumb. "You'll just have to see for yourself." The creatures continued their assault on the perimeter, clawing at the force field, attempting to get through. Nizu was observing the battle from the control room in the school. He had activated the defense systems and was now using the manual systems to defend the school. He could see the defense shield was already starting to buckle under the strain of the parademons' attack, dropping in percentage by the minute. He had to stem the tide somehow, but he knew that they would break through soon. The students and faculty were outnumbered 1,000 to 1, and they needed an edge. He leaned over to his computer and began typing. He knew exactly the kind of edge that they needed. Chapter 71, United They Stand. Fujiya Hospital. "I brought you some extra clothes and blankets. It's supposed to be kinda chilly next week." Fuyumi Todoroki smiled brightly as she sat down the duffel bag full of clothes, turning to face the middle-aged, white-haired woman sitting in the chair at the opposite end of the room. The woman smiled just as warmly back at her. Rei Todoroki, her mother, had been in this hospital for a long time, for a good portion of her childhood growing up. Once she was old enough, she started visiting her mother regularly, often accompanied by her younger brother, Natsuo, who was sitting on the bed across from his mother. "Yeah, well, the cold never bothered us, anyway," said Natsuo, chuckling. Fuyumi rolled her eyes and approached the pair, opting to lean against the wall instead of sitting. "It actually sounds nice," said Rei softly. "I like the cold. And I'm happy to see you both in good health." "Since he started college he stopped coming around as much," said Fuyumi, pointing to her brother. "I think he's got a girlfriend." "Oh come on, I see you guys plenty," said Natsuo quickly before changing the subject. "You're looking good too, Mom. How have things been?" "Very well, actually," she said, pulling several letters out of the desk beside her. "Shoto has been sending me letters, telling me all about his training and the remedial classes he's been taking to get his hero's license. He says it's tough, but he's working hard to catch up with his friends, especially this friend he calls Midoriya." "Midoriya," said Fuyumi. "Isn't that the kid who he fought in the sports festival?" "And the one who beat the hero killer," said Natsuo. "And was kidnapped by the League of Villains." "Oh my," said Rei. "That poor boy has been through so much. But it's no wonder Shoto looks up to him so much." "Huh. I never thought Shoto would ever make friends, much less look up to someone other than Almight," said Fuyumi thoughtfully. "Of course, he had it tougher than us growing up." A heavy pall seemed to cover the room at Fuyumi's words, silence stretching between them before Natsuo spoke. They officially made him number one now. Natsu, warned Fuyumi. It's not fair, Natsuo continued darkly. The world doesn't know what he did to you or to us, how terrible he treated his family. He doesn't even bother to mention us in his interviews. Natsuo, stop, said Fuyumi. Why would you even bring him up? Come on, sis, you know it's true, said Natsuo defensively. Don't fight, you two, Ray said in a calming voice. It's okay to talk about this. I barely remember him even being around, Natsuo said. He's barely more than a stranger. I don't care what happens to him, but he doesn't deserve the top spot, not after what he did to you and Shoto. Fuyumi wanted to argue, but she knew she couldn't. Ever since Shoto's powers manifested, he rarely spent any time with the rest of them. At first, the rest of the kids resented Shoto for this, but after a while they came to realize that Shoto would have rather spent time playing with them instead of the intense training his father put him through. They felt sorry for him, and often tried to stand up for him, but would be met with retribution by their father instead. The one who took the brunt of this was their mother. She hated how much he tormented her youngest son in his obsessive quest for overthrowing Almight. And now, instead of achieving this feat on his own, or by proxy by his son, with Almight's retirement, the role was pathetically forced upon him by default. The worst thing is that, even after all of that, he still couldn't beat Almight, said Natsuo. Everything that he did to us, to Shoto, and especially to you, Mom, and it was all for nothing. We suffered for nothing. And he doesn't even have the decency to acknowledge it. He just pretends as if nothing happened. Natsuo, said Ray sadly. I mean, it's been 10 years since he locked you up in here, Natsuo continued. And he doesn't even try to apologize. He just wants to leave the past behind and forget about us. I don't think that's true, said Ray. Why do you insist on defending him, Mom, you of all people? Asked Natsuo. Do you see those flowers? She said, gesturing to the vase of beautiful blue autumn bellflowers. He knows that they're my favorite. I only mentioned it to him once, back when we first met. Yet he never forgot, and always brings them to me every time he comes here. He's been here? Said Fuyumi, surprised. Yes, a lot of times, apparently, said Ray. The doctors won't let him see me. I'm still afraid, and they don't think him being here would be a wise idea. I don't know what he's feeling, or how his mind works. Nor do I try to understand the enormous pressures that are on him as one of the top heroes in Japan. But all I do know is that he's thinking about us. But he's too proud to admit it. As the two siblings sat there with their mother, taking in what was said to them, they began to hear a lot of commotion outside the room. Everyone was gathered around the television in the common room, talking busily and excitedly as the doctors attempted to calm the crowd down. What's going on? Asked Fuyumi to one of the doctors. Something seems to have happened, the news is reporting on it now, the doctor replied. The family looked at the TV in shock as the anchor showed a live footage that made the trio recoil in shock. What the? Said Natsuo aghast. What's happening? Asked Fuyumi. I'll tell you what's happening, said one of the patients, watching the report from the couch. It's the end of the world. Never before had the world seen such destruction. The horde of parademons descended upon the city like a swarm of monstrous wasps. Buildings were destroyed in the tremendous skirmish between the heroes, police and military, and these horrible creatures. Lives were lost in droves of carnage and ruination, but those were the lucky ones. Those who survived were quickly snatched by the creatures and spirited away to the ominous mothership hovering in the atmosphere. Hero, villain, criminal, civilian, it didn't matter. All were to be taken or killed, for what reason was still unknown. Truly this marked the end of humanity, as they knew it. But they weren't going down without a fight. Endeavor, the newly minted #1 hero in Japan, had barely left the official ranking ceremony, sitting in a cafe with the new #2 hero, Hawks, before the invasion had begun. The two heroes immediately set to work, trying in vain to stem the never-ending tide of monsters the likes of which Endeavor had never seen before in all his years of being a hero. "Endeavor!" A voice came from above him. Hawks began to descend from the sky and land next to him. "I've taken out dozens of those creatures, but they just keep coming. I'm starting to run out of feathers. Tell me you're having better luck. If you can't fight anymore, focus on saving citizens," said Endeavor, blasting 3 more parademons. "And keep your wits about you. We're not." Endeavor was interrupted as something heavy collided with him, sending him flying several feet away from where he was standing. It was lucky his instincts were so precise, as he had just barely had enough time to put his guard up before whatever it was had hit him. "Endeavor!" shouted Hawks, flying after him. The flame hero quickly found his second wind, using his flames to correct himself in midair before using his feet to shoot out 2 large fire blasts, allowing him to levitate, stopping his fall. Hawks had stopped abruptly, staying in the air beside him. "I didn't know you could fly," said Hawks. "Not for very long," said Endeavor, landing on the ground below him with grace. "Did you see the thing that hit me?" His answer came before Hawks could speak, jumping out of the way just in time as a large, silver broadaxe flew towards them, slicing past him just inches from his nose. The axe buried itself in the side of a building, crackling and vibrating with yellow electricity. "So these are the mightiest heroes this pathetic planet has to offer?" Endeavor and Hawks turned to the source of the voice. As the cloud of dust and smoke settled, a large and imposing figure stepped out of the shadows before them. It was a man, or at least appeared in the visage of a man, standing 7 feet tall, wearing heavy silver armor that looked to be of a metal Endeavor did not recognize, with a large red-horned skull belt girded about his waist. He wore a large helm atop his head, with 2 blade-like spires protruding on the sides, giving him a devil-like appearance. His eyes burned red with a fury and hatred that the 2 heroes had never seen before, one that shook them to their cores. "The great dark side sent me to this wretched place in promise of glorious battle, but I see now my talents are but wasted here," said the man. "Nevertheless, Steppenwolf will obey his lord, and will lay waste to your putrid home, starting with their so-called #1 hero." "You talk big," said Endeavor, running definitely towards the creature. "But you should not make promises you cannot keep." Fire burned from his boots as he used it to propel him at a faster speed than he could normally run, his hands burning bright from his hell flame. Roaring in fury, Endeavor threw a fire punch towards the man called Steppenwolf, but was shocked to see his fist caught effortlessly in his opponent's hand. "Your pathetic flames mean nothing to me," said Steppenwolf smugly. "My will was forged from the very fire pits of Apocalypse itself." He lifted his armored boot and kicked Endeavor hard in the torso, sending him careening into the glass of the building behind him. Steppenwolf then lifted his gauntlet hand, and the broadaxe recalled itself to its master. Seconds later, he threw the axe again, but with enough force to send it entirely through the building and out the other side. The electric energy from the weapon erupted like an energy sword, slicing through half of the building as if it was made of clay. Hawks looked in horror as he saw the people within the building scream and run as it began to crumble around them. Thinking quickly, he focused his remaining feathers to fly off and quickly seek out those in the most danger, using them to carry the civilians to safety. His quirk allowed him to control each one of his feathers individually, and it required a lot of concentration, but he wasn't the #2 hero for nothing. It pained him that he didn't have enough feathers to save all of them, but he had to focus on those who were in the most danger, hopefully buying enough time for backup to arrive. Seconds later, Endeavor burst from the wreckage, looking slightly injured, but otherwise intact. Steppenwolf immediately lunged towards his quarry, grabbing Endeavor by the throat, using the momentum to carry him towards the ground, slamming him into the cement below. Endeavor felt the wind get knocked out of him, his vision doubling as he fought against his attacker's hold on him. "The creatures here are truly weak, just as Desad said," Steppenwolf said as he sneered down at him. "If they put up as little resistance as their best warrior, then conquering this planet will be of little consequence." "Don't underestimate us just yet," shouted Endeavor, lifting his hands towards his foe, activating his flash fire fist. He could feel his temperature rise significantly as he did so before unleashing a powerful jet burn attack, surprising even Steppenwolf as he did. The alien warrior released him as he was blasted backwards, crashing into the buildings behind him. Endeavor used the temporary respite to gasp for breath and recenter himself. Seconds later, Steppenwolf burst from the building, landing several yards away from him, wiping a small trace of blood from his mouth before laughing. "That is more like it, human," he said. "Show me your true warrior spirit, and I shall grant you a swift and painless death. Be careful what you wish for," snarled Endeavor, dropping into a fighting stance. "As you can see, the streets are ravaged by these horrible monstrosities descending from the sky," shouted a blonde, female television news reporter as they hurriedly drove through the chaotic streets around them. "This is an event unlike anything we have ever seen." Since the appearance of the Martians and the Green Lantern Corps, interstellar life has always been the subject of mass debate and study, but never before had we anticipated an invasion of this magnitude. We always assumed with the Justice League and the hero community we would be safe from such events, but it appears we were wrong. And now the question is, where are the heroes? Where is the Justice League? "Wait, look!" shouted the cameraman, panning downward. The reporter followed the cameraman's view, gasping in surprise. She could see the new number one hero, Endeavor, engaged in combat against what she assumed was either a villain, or much more likely, one of the invading forces. This opponent looked different from the mindless beasts that they were watching descend from the skies. "This Justin, we see the new number one hero of Japan, Endeavor, currently locked in combat against an unknown alien assailant," she shouted. "This is an intense battle, buildings and streets crumbling around them, while other heroes around them rescuing civilians, attempting crowd control, or fighting off the attacking monsters." As military and police forces continue to scramble, and both hero and civilian lives have been lost, we need the heroes now more than ever. I only hope that our new top hero is up to the task. "Weak!" shouted Steppenwolf. He was holding Endeavor by the throat in a vice-like grip. The flame hero activated his flash fire fist, throwing a heavy cross to the face of his enemy. But Steppenwolf was undeterred, simply catching the fist with his other hand. "Weak and slow," Steppenwolf sneered. With a mighty spin, he threw the struggling Endeavor crashing into the ruined building in front of him, causing an eruption of fire, glass and ash. "Is this all that you have to offer, mortals? You are not enough!" Endeavor felt the steam burning off his skin as he began to sweat, Steppenwolf's words echoing in his ears. His flash fire fist increased his firepower exponentially for a short amount of time, but it also increased his body temperature. The higher it got, it started to affect his body. The same way a fever destroys viruses and bacteria, it also damages the body if it does not break. This Steppenwolf was strong. Much stronger and faster than he was. What's more, there seemed to be no limit to his stamina and dexterity. While Endeavor began to tire and suffer from his injuries, Steppenwolf appeared to be perturbed by the battle. He knew that holding back could be fatal, but overheating was also a problem. Despite the chaos around him, Endeavor's mind began to drift as he remembered a time, long ago, a time he thought forgotten. Ever since he had first begun to hone his quirk, overheating was always a problem. It was one of the most infuriating reasons that he was never able to surpass Almight. While his quirk had limits, that smiling buffoon's did not. It was a seemingly endless supply of raw power. But if he could overcome the overheating problem, then perhaps he could surpass his adversary. Overcoming Almight was his whole purpose. It was what drove him to seek out Ray, so he could sire an heir that would not share his weakness. Weakness. That was the reason. The true reason behind his actions. He wanted to erase the weakness within him. Pushing his weakness upon those whom he called his family. Those he loved. But now, as the world was crumbling around them under the alien siege, he could see how pointless that quest was. How meaningless his obsession was. How meaningless his life has been. But that would end today. "What is that idiot doing?" shouted Natsuo, looking at the television. "He needs to retreat and wait for backup. Does he really think he can beat that thing?" "Natsuo!" Fuyumi scolded. "Come on, sis!" Natsuo retorted. Every action he's ever taken, our neglect, Shoto's abuse, driving Mom to the breaking point, it has all been about him not being able to beat All Might. If he can't beat All Might, what chance does he have at beating this guy? Fuyumi wanted to argue, but she couldn't. She was frightened to her core. Most of the villain attacks that were seen on television or in the news were small-time, such as petty burglary or idiots with monster quirks causing a ruckus. It wasn't until the Kamino Ward incident had the world seen a true villain attack. But this was on a completely different level. This was a full-on invasion of an alien species. Fuyumi was frightened. Frightened for herself, her family, the people who were out there suffering and dying, and for her father. If he couldn't find a way to win, then what hope was there? The Justice League was absent, All Might retired, and the heroes were overwhelmed. Was this really the end? Natsuo, said Fuyumi. I know you don't want to hear this, and maybe you can't accept the truth right now, but look at our father. He never gives up. He's the most stubborn man in the world. He won't give up. Not now, not ever. The panic began to grow worse as the invasion continued. Heroes were dropping like flies, people being captured or killed in droves. It was a horrible sight to see. It was as if humanity had left the people as they desperately ran, pushing and shoving, hurting each other, in an effort to get to safety, desperate to save their lives. The Justice League is gone, said the reporter, fear welling in her eyes. Endeavor has fallen. There is no hope. The symbol of peace is gone. She screamed as a Paranon burst from the wreckage beside her, lunging at her with its horrible claws. She braced herself for death, but another explosion beside her caught her attention. The monster was down, with what looked to be several arrows protruding from the chinks in its armor. She felt her knees grow weak and was about to fall to the ground when something caught her. Easy there, came a comforting voice. I've got you. She looked up to see she was being supported by a tall man with blonde hair and blue eyes, wearing a green jumpsuit with a bow and quiver strapped to his back. It took her a moment, but she soon recognized him. You're, she said weakly. You're the Green Arrow. That's right, said the Arrow. And you need to get on your feet. He helped her up as he said it. So the Justice League didn't abandon us? Said the reporter. Never, said Arrow. Look around you. These heroes are fighting for your lives. Fighting for our planet. And the Justice League is as well. Just because All Might isn't around doesn't mean that it's hopeless. You don't need a symbol to flock to. You need yourselves. He turned to face the camera this time. The time has come for you to stop watching from the sidelines and to become heroes yourselves. If you have a quirk, then use it. Don't give these monsters an inch. Don't make their jobs easy. Give them a fight for their lives. Give them hell. Do whatever you can, but don't give up. Be your own symbols and fight. With that, he drew his bow and began fighting more of the monsters. There you have it, said the shaken reporter, turning back to the camera. It's time for us to fight back. Whether you are a hero, a civilian, or whatever, if you have a quirk, now is the time to use it. Let's help these heroes who protect our lives every day and fight by their sides. Endeavor struggled to return to his feet, feeling the strain from the battle, his injuries screaming in protest. He could hear the heavy armored boots stomping as his enemy drew closer to him. He could only see out one eye, blood flowing down from a large wound on the left side of his face. You still try to fight me, though you barely cling to life, said Steppenwolf, laughing. You are nothing if not persistent. I suppose that is to be commended. You are a lot like me in that way. He pondered for a moment. You amuse me, mortal. I will spare you if you beg for your life. Perhaps I can keep you as my pet. We are nothing alike, Endeavor spat defiantly. And I would die 1,000 deaths standing before I beg for life on my knees to a creature like you. Very well, human, said Steppenwolf, raising his axe. At least you die with the knowledge that you had the honor of being felled by the great Steppenwolf for the glory of Darkseid. The warrior was taken by surprise as something large and heavy collided with the side of his head, sending him flying several hundred meters before he crashed into a pile of rubble. Endeavor looked up in shock at what had just appeared before him, a large, black robot of sorts, standing at least 10 feet tall, bathed in the light of the fire around him. Endeavor readied himself, unsure of the intentions of this new friend or foe. "Who are you?" said Endeavor. The robot paused before speaking. "There's no need to worry, my friend," came a familiar voice from the speakers. The head of the robot to reveal it was being piloted by a human that Endeavor immediately recognized, flabbergasted at his sudden and unexpected appearance. "I am here," said Almight. Almight could feel his chest tightening as he ran towards his car. He had just made sure that the students were taken back to UA, and the teachers were alerted. He was ordered to take up safety in one of the panic rooms located around campus, but he would have none of it. He knew there wasn't much he could do in his current state, but he had to do something. Then he remembered Bruce's words about his car, Hercules. When All Might had first gotten it, he had it customized to include several support items to help him in case of an emergency. Bruce said he modified it. Maybe there was something that could help in this situation. Once he reached the car, he fumbled around in his jacket until he found the keys. There was the big red button on the fob that Bruce had mentioned. With some trepidation, he pushed it and braced himself. The car immediately sprang to life. He stared in shock as it began to twist and contort right before his eyes, until finally coming to rest in a form that left him dumbfounded. "You have to be kidding me," he said. "Nothing major, Bruce?" "All Might?" said Endeavor, dumbfounded. "What are you doing here? What is that thing you're in?" "It's a long story, but I don't think we have time right now," he said, closing the armored head. "Looks like the guy is back on his feet." Endeavor turned to see that Steppenwolf had indeed emerged from the rubble and was running quickly to their location. He grunted in pain as he readied himself. "When this is over, you have some explaining to do," Endeavor said. "Noted," said All Might. "But for now, let's just take this guy down."
Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.